Excellent. Welcome everybody to our January 25th, 2023 City of Courtenay regular council meeting. We are meeting in the CVRD Civic Room on Harmson Avenue, and it's our second Wednesday meeting of the term. It's very exciting. Just want to start by respectfully acknowledging that the land on which the meeting is being conducted is the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. And another announcement that Councillor Frisch has provided notice that he'll be on medical leave for approximately 2 months, and his family's asked for privacy at this time. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Councillor Jolliger.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, January 25th, is National Bell Let's Talk Day. It's a widely supported day of action and fundraising to support mental health awareness, research, and services across the country. It's also a day to continue to talk about how we still do not have universal mental health care in Canada. And with ongoing and worsening social, economic, and environmental issues continuing to impact our personal and collective well-being, now more than ever, we need to continue to raise awareness around reducing stigma, supporting ourselves and those in our lives to talk about mental health and to get support, and to advocate for reducing barriers to access to timely, preventative, comprehensive, culturally safe, and publicly funded mental health services and programs. Bell Let's Talk Day is a one-day campaign today for mental health awareness. Bell donates 5 cents for every call or text by a Bell customer and for every social media post that contains the hashtag Bell Let's Talk. We know that everyone is touched by mental health and substance use disorders, either themselves or impacted by someone they know. In Canada, 1 in 3 will experience a mental illness or a substance use disorder during their lifetime. In 2020, almost 1 in every 4 hospitalizations across the country for those between 5 and 24 years old were due to mental health. But not all of us are affected equally. We know that the conversation around mental health and substance use needs to include an intersectional lens around race, gender, disability, sexual orientation, and the importance of including social determinants of health in our conversation of mental health. That means we need to have conversations, which we have here at Council, around housing, employment discrimination, our criminal justice system, school curriculums, and other spaces that do not support people with mental illnesses. And so with that, I encourage everyone to participate in today's Bell Let's Talk Day by using the hashtag Bell Let's Talk to support funding for mental health research. And if you or someone you know is in need of support, please reach out to a friend, call the mental health intake nurse here locally in Comox Valley. That's 250-331-8525, or visit them on England Ave at 941 England Ave in Courtenay. And if you're in crisis, please call 310-6789. There's no area code. Again, that's 310-6789. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jolliger. Appreciate that. And are there any introductions of late items? I don't believe anybody had spoke to me about anything. Moving on, regular council minutes from January 11th. Excellent. Are there any errors or omissions? Anyone opposed to adoption? They're adopted. Thank you. Moving on to to delegations. Ooh, getting ahead of myself. I started my morning with Ray. We're going to have a presentation from Dawn to Dawn Action on Homeless Society, and we have Lee Everson and Ray Windsor. And if you want to approach the podium there, the floor is yours. And you just push the button, and then I'll get your. There we go.
Thank you. Mayor Wells and councillors, thank you for the opportunity to meet with you today. My name is Ray Windsor. I'm the president of Dawn to Dawn, and I'm accompanied today by Lee Everson, who's a project manager for an exciting, unique, and bold program that we're about to launch. I will begin with a brief overview of our organization, and then Lee will introduce you to our Gukwas Sawagalos Rainbow House project. Dawn to Dawn Action on Homelessness Society has been operating here in the Comox Valley since the spring of 2009. In the intervening years, we have housed and helped more than 200 people, including individuals and families. We've helped these folks find safe, secure housing and hopefully to create stability in their lives. Many of them have gone on to gain their independence and find long-term housing. Today, We are housing 50 people, including 11 children. We use a scattered housing model, providing rental subsidies for select market units that Dawn to Dawn rents. And we have purchased 4 condo apartments and 1 house, where we also provide subsidized housing for our clients. Once housed, our clients are linked with organizations in the Valley to help them access the services they need to gain their independence and to self-actualize. This could be jobs or skills training, mental and physical health treatment, among other services. Dawn to Dawn employs 1 full-time outreach worker for all client contact, and we are currently looking to engage another outreach worker. Our funding at Dawn to Dawn, we require about $700,000 a year to run our program. The funds we get come from various sources, including BC Housing, grants, and donations from individuals and groups. This is where we are today, but we are about to embark on a project that is certainly unique to BC and may be unlike anything anywhere else in Canada. I'm delighted to have our project manager, Lee Everson, here to introduce this initiative and describe how we got here and where we're going. Lee.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be here, and it's great to see so many familiar faces and a bunch of new ones as well. So when Grant Schilling, I don't know if you guys know him or of him, but Grant is the one who sparked the whole idea of Gyukwitsa-Wagalus. Grant is, he grew up for a lot of years in Vancouver, and he lived within the queer community in Vancouver, which he absolutely loved that time. Then he was saying that the AIDS epidemic happened in the early 80s, and he said it absolutely devastated the community. It went from being such a joyful place to years of ignorance, government inaction, and prejudice. Fast forward to a few years recently here in the Valley, where there was a community leader who had posted some transphobic comments online, and it kind of brought him back to that time, and had thought that we had, as a society, that we've moved forward from that. And then also Grant's family, he lost most of them to the Holocaust as well. So it had brought up a lot of stuff that he was holding around that. And so from that point, he started doing kind of deep dive into research and found that the numbers for our LGBTQIA+ youth that are homeless is staggering. And so from that point, he came up with the idea of a peer-supported home for 2S LGBTQIA+ youth in the Valley. And that's what has gotten the project to where we are today. Grant is our champion, as he's worked for 10 years as a frontline community worker. And I am very grateful that he does that work, because it would be a very, very difficult job. Dawn to Dawn is very grateful for the commitments that the Courtenay Council has made towards equity, inclusion, fighting discrimination, and supporting affordable housing initiatives, plus supporting KFN initiatives as well. I'd like to share a few stats with you. 5% of the population on Vancouver Island are Indigenous. 40% of the homeless people on Vancouver Island are Indigenous. 40% of the beds that are within Gyukwitsa-Wagalus will be reserved for our Indigenous youth. So now we get to the good part. I'd like to ask you for some considerations for Gyukwitsa-Wagalus. Currently, the city of Courtenay provides a 40% reduction in municipal tax for Dawn to Dawn, and we wish to request that extend to Gyukwitsa-Wagalus should we purchase a home in the Courtenay boundary. We also would request leniency on permitting, developmental fees, again, should we purchase a home in the Courtenay area. We ask that you keep Dawn to Dawn in mind should Courtney have a piece of property that might be suitable for Waigaloos. Lastly, and on April 14, 15, Dawn to Dawn is featuring a film, The Empress of Vancouver, and a drag show. The first one hosted at Sid Williams Theatre. Everybody's really excited. And we'd like to request the city's take from this event go towards a donation to the society. If that's not possible, we would like to request a $2,500 donation go towards the project for development, fundraising, and awareness activities. Please note that we are asking Comox and Cumberland for the same donation. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, we are open to taking any of your questions.
Excellent. Thanks very much. And while the lights start to come on here, I heard you say Comox and Cumberland. I just wanted to make sure regional district is part of that as well. As we just found out with the Wache project, when they came to us for their DCC waiving, ours was less than 100,000, and the regional district portion of those DCs was quite a bit north of, I think, 300 to 350,000. So don't forget about the regional district.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's my only comment. With that being said, I'll pass it over to Councillor Gillian.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you envision the house itself, how many people would live there, what the structure would be, that type of thing.
Absolutely. Right now, we are proposing a 5-bedroom house and with a peer support live-in. So like a suite or a building just off, but it would be on the property. Tomorrow, we are actually having a youth gathering at the Courtney Library, and we're bringing youth together to hear what they would like within the house. Like what are some of the needs that they would like to see in the house?
Thanks. And when you say youth, I'm assuming that probably goes up to 25 or something in that neighborhood.
16 to 28.
Great. Thanks very much. Best wishes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gillian and Councillor McCollum.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. This was great to see another initiative coming forward. And this is a unique project that we haven't seen anything like this in the time that I've been on council. So I just want to express my support for what you're doing. And then I just had a couple of questions about the project itself. I noticed in the little attachment that was provided for the delegation, there's mention of perhaps finding a house to renovate, but then you also mentioned vacant land. So is it wide open, or is there a preference for finding an existing building?
Yeah, what we were looking at the options of building and of purchasing. And what we're finding is that there's no lots that are actually suitable. Our realtor was sending us some lots, but like she's saying, these actually aren't suitable for what you're looking for. So that has moved us over to, if we can purchase a home and then do a renovation, that would probably be, it's going to be better suited.
And there's a timeline element as well.
Yeah.
A greenfield is going to take a very long time, and if we purchase a property and renovate, we could move that project ahead much more rapidly.
Yeah, great. I think that sounds like a simpler option. And I would add that doing a renovation would allow for the selection of location that could be more accessible to city services like transit and whatnot. Regardless of what municipality it ends up in, generally, there's not a lot of greenfield or empty lots that are close to, our transportation corridors. So that's good to hear. And then I just wanted to ask if there is going to be a proposal coming through the homelessness support service that the regional district works on with our housing coalition partners, and if that's being worked on in conjunction with these delegations, or
It's all, we've already worked with the coalition, and we're part of the coalition. And they know about our project and support it. And we are working with Pride Comox Valley and with the Comox First Nation and towards moving this project.
That's great. Well, I hope that the slowdown in the real estate market provides some good options for this project going forward. It may be good conditions for that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum and Councillor Moore.
Mayor, thanks so much for the presentation. It's nice to hear a little bit more about the project. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the number of units that you were hoping for. Was it 5, did you say, or
That's right.
5?
Yeah.
And what's there's all kinds of definitions for youth. So what's your age range that you're thinking?
16 to 28.
16 to 28, okay. Yeah, I think it's exciting idea. I was involved a little bit with the startup of the John Howard Youth Housing, and I remember the focus groups, and it was, I'm sure you'll hear some of the same stories that the young folks really wanted a sense of community. They actually wanted to be able to sit around and play board games and cook together and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure you'll hear similar things. I'm not sure if the PFLAG group is going anymore, but I'm just thinking of the idea of involving allies in helping with fundraising as well. Those parents and family members of folks who are supportive, part of another little group that of adults who are available to help youth who maybe have been disowned by family. So if there's a wedding or a graduation, I'm kind of on call to be an auntie or a person to attend, but I haven't been called on yet. So, some of those groups might also be a good source of support and maybe funding as well. Because it is, I know how it impacts young folks who are part of the queer community. And so this is really awesome news. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Moore. And I would just maybe mention, if you get a little closer to the mic, just so that those online can hear the question, because I think we can hear them okay, but it's a little quiet otherwise. But with that, I'll pass it over to Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And thanks so much for the presentation. And when you next see him, please thank Grant for all the hours he obviously poured into this. Is clearly a labor of love. I would echo the comments of all of my colleagues. It's a great initiative. I'm really happy to see it here. And I just had a technical question, which I think probably be for Adam here, which is, does the city get a take from individual Sid Williams shows? I'm guessing it goes to the society, but that may be something we can resolve.
I wrote that down as a question to follow up on.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam. And I don't see any further questions, but as you can see, you've come to probably some fairly supportive, friendly ground here. And I really appreciate you reaching out quite a while ago, I think now, and coming to the city and speaking with us. And again, I think it's something that whose time has come, and really looking forward to seeing this project develop. So with that, we'll let you guys go.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, next we have a presentation from BC Assessment, which is very timely. Fantastic. Maurice?
Yes.
There we go. We can see you. Just give us 1 second to make sure we got your video working properly with our stream. Just be a moment.
Yeah.
No. All right. Oh, maybe I'll turn the podium off as well. Okay, Maurice, we'll pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Everyone can see and hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. So thank you for having me today. I'd like to thank Adam Langmeyer, CFO, for inviting me to the City of Courtenay and welcoming him to the City of Courtenay from Powell River. Before I begin, BC Assessments Nanaimo office is located on the traditional territories of the Sunami Nation and the Coast Salish people here in North Nanaimo. A little bit about me. I've been with BC Assessment just about 18 years in the Vancouver Island region exclusively, and deputy assessor for about 6 years. Graduated of the UBC Sauder School of Business from the real estate division, and a member in good standing of the Real Estate Institute of British Columbia. My portfolio includes all residential non-strata properties on Vancouver Island, as well as our Indigenous communities on Vancouver Island. And I have about a staff complement of about 24 who help me get out 2 assessment roles every year, one for our provincial role and one for our Indigenous communities. Okay, just going to, do I have control to the slide? I'm not sure I have control to, thank you. Okay. Topics of discussion this afternoon are going to be BC assessment and a bit about the assessment role, a little bit of assessment 101, valuation, market value, classification, an intro to our assessment cycle and key dates, a little discussion around assessment and taxes, and a bit of a high-level overview of the 2023 assessment role for the City of Courtenay, and then some other resources. Next slide, please. Okay, and carry on. So we are a provincial crown corporation formed in 1974 under the Assessment Authority Act, operating independently of taxing function and politics. Prior to that, local governments were setting the assessment role and setting taxes. So we were formed to be the independent body to establish the assessed values. We produce an annual assessment role, which includes identifying ownership values and classification for and exemptions for properties across the province, representing over 2 million folios, and with an assessed total assessed value of around just about $3 trillion, which generates almost $8.3 billion annually in property taxes, so we can run our communities in British Columbia. Next slide, please. So it's important to note that we value properties in different ways. So we use market value, which is the most probable price a person would pay for a property in an open market without undue duress or stimulus, preferably with a realtor. This will give us a real true market value understanding of what properties are worth. And then we also have some legislated properties that are valued by rates that are set by cabinet. Next slide, please. So when we go to set market value, it's really important to understand the factors that influence or affect market value. So we've all heard the old adage, location, 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 and this is very true. It's your proximity to amenities, transit, employment, and recreation. Land use controls, the official community plan, the neighborhood plan, zoning is very important, restrictive covenants, etc. Land characteristics, so about the actual property itself, its area, shape, topography, access to utilities and services. Building characteristics, the use, the size, the quality, the age, condition of a particular building, particularly in residential, which is 88% of our folios. This is very, very important. And then for commercial properties, the income potential, rentable value, expenses, like management, structural repairs, maintenance, vacancies, and capitalization rates help us determine the values for commercial properties. Next slide, please. Highest and best use. So highest and best use has 4 principles applied to it, and it's the foundation for market value. And this is the most reasonable probable use for a property. So when we examine highest and best use, we can rely on local governments to help us determine the highest and best use by ensuring that BC Assessment has the information required to determine what the highest and best use of a property is. So a little bit about the 4 principles of highest and best use. So what is physically possible on that property? They may be that possibility may be affected by access to services, geotechnical constraints, slope stability, rock outcroppings, etc. And then we look to what's legally permissible on a site. Land use controls can influence this, the official community plan, zoning, land use designations, restrictive covenants, etc. And then for most savvy buyers, what is financially feasible? The uses generated return above and beyond the cost to develop the site, and what is the most productive use? So out of the test of the physically possible, legally permitted, and financially feasible uses, which results in the highest value? So we apply this, you know, if you think about development land sites, or new construction of in an area, you know, we look at the highest and best use of lands, development of raw land, subdivisions. We always take into account highest and best use of the property. Next slide, please. So how land use affects market value. And as it says here, and it's very, very clear, being on Vancouver Island almost 50 years, our communities are changing. So local governments primarily impact highest and best use via land use controls, as we talked about, and development approvals. Market value is impacted by the legal and approved uses of a property. When a land use control changes, for example, to permit higher density use, the highest and best use of a site can change, which may lead to change in market value, which should, with the right evidence, dictate if a change is warranted. So, you know, we've seen a lot of influence by market demand, supply and demand in the marketplace. And that demand drives a lot of the values that we look at and makes us reconfigure and relook at the highest and best use of sites. And then we report that out on the assessment notice every July 1st. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a very important piece I like to emphasize in these types of presentations, especially around Assessment 101. It's a really important piece that BC Assessment does, and it's how we classify properties. So under the prescribed property tax regulation, this piece of legislation guides BC Assessment on how we classify properties in British Columbia. Why do we do this? Property classes allow a variable tax rate system, different tax rates by different property types. It supports partial or complete exemptions from assessment or taxation, whether it be like different acts like the School Act, the Community Charter, Local Government Act, Taxation Rural Act, etc. So just to talk about the different classifications. Residential, it's pretty straightforward. It's land or improvements or both used by for residential purposes. And that's everything from single family dwellings, duplexes, condominiums, manufactured homes, summer and seasonal dwellings, etc. Class 2 utilities. It's a little bit of a lengthy description, but in essence, transportation, transmission, or distribution by pipeline, telecommunications, could be means of electric current, signals, fiber optics, that sort of thing. Class 3 is the only eligible supportive housing property designation that we use for that type of property, and it is found in Schedule B of the Assessment Act, and is presented is approved by Cabinet every year. So they'll give us a list of notice roll numbers that we will apply supportive housing values to, which are typically $1 land, $1 improvement. Class 4 major industry, land used in conjunction with the operation of industrial improvements and industrial activities. Class 5 light industry, gathering pipelines, manufacturing, transportation of products, storage of products, extracting. Class 6, I'm going to come back to in just a second. But Class 7 is your managed forest lands. Properties in this category must meet the definition of managed forest lands through the prescribed legislation. Class 8, recreational non-for-profit. Think of everything from a golf course to a skating rink to a racetrack, a car racetrack, that sort of thing. Those are Class 8. And Class 9 is your farmland classification. That is classification under the farm regulation for Class 9, which is substantially lower land values for those who are bona fide farmers and they meet the test of a farming activity. So when we go back to class 6, business and other, the business is pretty straightforward. It's all your retail and commercial and industrial, most industrial sites. And then anything that doesn't fit into the other prescribed property classes, which is pretty rare, will fall into class 6. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm just going to touch on our assessment annual cycle and key dates. So this is all legislated for us on an annual basis, our business cycle, if you want to say. So right now we're in the top bubble, January 1st to 31st is our inquiry period. So right now our appraisers on the floor are taking calls from property owners from 8:30 to 5 p.m. every day and via email to inquire about their property assessments. And our appraisers are here to answer those questions to help build an understanding around the assessed value. And then if both parties agree to disagree, which does happen, they have until January the 31st at midnight to file an appeal of their property assessment. And then we'll move to the second bubble on the right, which is February 1st, March 31st. This is the property assessment review panel. So these are the hearings that we have, first stage or first level of appeal, if you want to say, of property assessments. And then we'll move into, and those conclude on March 31st. Property owners and local governments will get their revised roll and revised assessment notices if you've appealed, roughly the last few days of March, beginning of April. Then we have the next stage of appeal, which is the Property Assessment Appeal Board. It's more of a formalized appeal process. You have until April 30th to file your appeal against for that hearing process. And then from April to September, we really focus on assessment projects and work throughout the year to build the next annual assessment roll. This will be looking at sales, processing subdivisions, processing new construction, boundary changes, extensions, OCP changes, all the things I talked about that go into highest and best use and valuation throughout the year. That's when we dig in and we kind of step back from the appeal process and then focus forward towards our next year's assessment roll. As we get towards the year end, we get into a feverish pitch where we start roll production. So this is when we take all the information and all the data that we've assembled throughout the summertime, and we put it into various models, and we start setting the roll for the following year. Some important key dates around roll production. October 31st is the physical condition and permitted use. What is the condition of the property as of October 31st and its actual permitted use to be captured on the assessment roll. Land title records, ownership as of November 30th. December 31st, assessment notices are produced and mailed out provincially. December 31st, those noted on the assessment roll are liable for the taxation as mentioned on the assessment roll. Next slide, please. Okay, let me just turn to my notes, sorry. So BC assessment functions independently of taxing authorities and does not set property tax rates. Hence our formation back in 1974. An individual's property assessment determines their share of their property taxes for the property class that they fall in. Again, the prescribed property class regulation, very important. BC assessment's function is to ensure the property tax burden is distributed equally amongst similarly situated taxpayers. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic that appears on all of our assessment notices, on our media and our YouTube channel, etc. And this is the impact of changes in assessed value on taxes. So we all have heard, my taxes or my assessment's gone up by 20%. I can't afford my taxes to go up 20%. So our messaging around that, if your assessed value is lower than the average change for your property class, then your taxes will likely decrease. Similar to the average change, your taxes will probably remain the same. Higher than average change, you can probably expect an increase in your property taxes. But it all comes with a few caveats that we need to be very clear on. This is predicated that your local government budgets are going to remain the same, and that's the status quo. However, with inflation, demand on community services, the growth of your community, all the services that the citizens demand of the community, changes the budget. Most communities may see an increase in property taxes as communities continue to grow. And I'm going to touch on those numbers in a slide coming up. Next, please. Okay. We are going to talk a little bit high level here about the assessment role provincially, and then drill down into the city of Courtenay. So next slide, please. So before I dig into that, I'm gonna talk a little bit about something called non-market change. And I apologize, that slide was omitted from my slide deck, but I want to talk about that before I start talking about numbers. So there's something really important to distinguish with the annual assessment role and the Indigenous roles, and that is non-market change. So this is non-market change is the change in value not related to market change. So we'll have influence, and we'll look at sales, and we'll move the assessment role based on market. We'll also add to the assessment role or take away from the assessment role things such as we will add new construction. We will take away anything that's been demolished, subdivision zoning changes, boundary extensions, property class changes, and exemption status changes will all affect what's called non-market change. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to say on that before I move into the next slide. Thank you very much. Okay, so move my slide along here too. So for the 2023 completed provincial assessment role, this is what we're looking at. So the total value, the total assessed value of the assessment role, this from 2022 is up 11.5% to $2.72 trillion. Non-market change overall provincially is down about 1% to 33.52 billion from the previous year. Provincially, it was around 2.44 trillion. The total role was 2.44 trillion in 2022, and the non-market change has dropped as well, just about 1%. For class 1, which is residential classification, once again, it makes a significant portion of our annual assessment role at 88%, and that residential value is about $2.1 trillion. Total properties assessed for 2023 is just over 2.1 million folios, which is almost a percentage increase from 2022. So, you know, when you have growth in your communities, this is where the non-market change comes in to help with that growth, those tax dollars that we can give, that local governments can collect to grow their communities. And it also goes to sorry, I'm gonna next slide, please. I'm gonna save that for later. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the city of Courtenay. Sorry for my stumble there. So for this year, the number of properties in the city of Courtenay had a moderate increase of about 0.5% to 13,418 folios. Last year, it was about 13,267. So very moderate increase over the previous year. The increase in the total roll is up about 13.8%. To 9.82 billion, up from 8.6 the previous year. And then non-market change is down quite a bit this year, just about 30%. And last year it was $2.12 million down to 151 million. So having a look at that, and we'll see it a little bit coming up in another slide, would be a slowdown in real estate construction would be the biggest factor of that. A lot of new activity occurred in 2021 and 2022, but not, or sorry, 2020 and 2021. So for 2022 was quite a bit quieter on the new starts front. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so for the city of Courtenay, residential single family from 2021 to 2022, the market value, the typical change is about 13%. Previously, it was about 35% in the last year's roll. If we can all remember, we saw some pretty substantive increases across Vancouver Island. Residential strata this year is up about 10%. Previously, last year, it was about 30%. Commercial properties are for about 6.4% from 10% last year. So moderate change on that. Yeah, next slide, please. So the you can see historically how non-market change has changed in Courtenay. So going back to 2020, we started seeing a heavy investment in new construction residentially through the city of Courtenay, and it's diminished. Particularly, this is 2022 to 2023 roll year. It's down. It grew for a bit. Now it's down. Residential strata did the same thing. It grew during the peak times during the COVID, and then it's decreased down quite substantially over the previous year. However, we've seen quite an uptake in Class 6 non-market change, your business and other. And I spoke to my colleague who manages the Class 6 portfolio, and we've had a lot of investment and building of auto dealerships and those type properties. So that's where the non-market change came from. It was quite quiet in 2022. Sorry, this is coming from 2021, and then the 2023 for the 2023 roll, we saw quite an uptake in completing of some new construction of those type properties. So overall, in the assessment roll, we're down, like I said, about 30% in non-market change for all property classes. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this year was surprisingly another robust year coming out of the pandemic. I remember hearing from CMHC that they anticipated with the pandemic coming that there would be a real slump in the real estate market. Obviously, that did not happen. It went completely the opposite direction with low interest rates, people wanting to live and be on properties away from urban areas, investment into more rural areas, moving outside of larger cities to smaller communities. We saw still a strong demand for inventory across Vancouver Island. Some overbidding was still prevalent in the market this year, not much, not as much as the previous year, 2022, or the 2021 year for 2022 roll. However, there was a little bit this year. What surprised me is the number of sales still increased over last year when I thought we might have a bit of a cooling market towards the end of the year, which we have seen, but still market volume sales was still up over the previous year. And actual sale prices have been surprising. Coming from a guy who grew up as a boy in Parksville, you know, just about 5,000 SFD sales north of the Malahat. This is not including the capital region in Victoria. Almost 5,000 sales over $1 million north of the Malahat, and over 600 more than $2 million. Absolutely unheard of in Vancouver Island in all the years that I've been doing this, and what I've seen growing up on the island. So it's been a very busy year once again. Vancouver Island 2023 residential SFD assessments. We're up about 10 to 20% island-wide, a few exceptions in the North Island, and then 5 to 15% for the rest of the province. So we were still quite strong, had a strong presence in the real estate market on Vancouver Island. A desirable place to live, in my opinion, and it kind of shows by what we're seeing here. If we can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, and business and other, still strong market demand this the first half of last year for commercial properties. My colleague informs me that industrial properties and warehousing has been very strong, especially in the South and Mid Islands. Activity is showing, economic recovery is active with IC9 properties across Vancouver Island. We're starting to see values come back up out of the pandemic. Assessment values are largely driven by market demand and income activity, and changes in the area are about 5 to 7% compared to the rest of Vancouver Island. And just going to touch on a few processes and other resources. I already covered this. I'll just touch on it really quickly. Again, January 31st is the final deadline to file an appeal, but I recommend that your constituents and property owners, they have a chat with us first, give us a call, and let's talk about your property assessment. The appeal deadline, again, January 31st. Appeals are heard February 1st to March 15th. And then afterwards, April 30th is your deadline to appeal to the Property Assessment Appeal Board. Beyond that, it's you appeal to the BC Supreme Court or the Court of Appeal only on matters of law out of the assessment function. Okay, last slide. So I want to just highlight a few things here. We have a really robust website with a lot of property information on it. I highly recommend that if you have 5 minutes, you explore it and take a look around. Here's what you'll find. The assessment search tool, you can put on, you can type in an address and find comparable properties and values across the province. You can drill down to a map level. You can click on the properties beside it. You can see the land and improvement values. You can see when properties have sold. It's very good for particularly for the residential homeowner, which is again 88% of the provincial assessment roll, to go in and determine if their property values are fair and equitable. And they can develop build a profile where they can save their comparables if they want to use in an appeal setting. And there's some more functions available to them through the website if they create a profile. Market trends and news, you can look at almost every jurisdiction and neighborhood across the province and see what they did for residential, commercial, and strata properties where they exist. And that's also done through our interactive mapping. You can update minor property information. So this is new in the last couple of years, where a property owner can go in and submit a declaration to say, you know, the square footage is this or the number of bedrooms is that, and we can take that information away and update our system. We may contact the property owner to verify everything, but that is now available to the property owners, and they can also change their mailing address with us that way as well. Very fulsome information around understanding the assessment process and the appeals process for both the provincial roll and the Indigenous roll. And then there's also an entryway to the portal for local governments to access our data advice with an IDAR account. So there's lots of information at your fingertips. YouTube videos, how we do our work videos, and find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. And of course, the old-fashioned telephone, please call us 1-866-825-8322 and talk to an appraiser about your assessed value. And next slide. That concludes my presentation. I would ask if there is any questions.
Excellent. Thanks, Maurice. And maybe while the lights are starting to light up here, I'll just ask maybe a quick question. When you talk about the supportive housing side of things, you said that the province gives you a list. And I just wondered where that list came from, if that's a BC Housing list, and just wondering if like all nonprofits, like we had Don to Don talk tonight, and if their properties would be part of that or not.
No, so those are, to my knowledge, they are crafted in conjunction with BC Housing and our government, our provincial government, and the cabinet prescribes a list of roll numbers that we will add to the assessment roll that fall under class 3. It's a very prescribed list. I can share a list with you if you like.
That'd be great. Appreciate that. I'm still waiting for some other lights to go on, so I got another question while I'm waiting. And one of the things that I found out when the first time I heard this presentation about 8 years ago is that there are some, the majority of people are happy with their assessments. There's very little people that dispute them, but the sort of caveat to that is big box stores. And there were sort of, I'm not sure if there were disputes or lawsuits or something. And I just wondered kind of where those sit at, if there's still some of these really big sort of disputes over land values for the big box stores, or if that's been settled.
Okay, so I can't speak to any particular big box, but I'm going to speak in general terms in this setting. So there are some properties that undergo multi-year appeals for value. There's quite a few that have been resolved, but if you have a particular one in mind that you want to talk about, we can take this offline and I can talk in further details around it if you like. But we're constantly resolving appeals. We don't like to keep appeals hanging or in multi-year appeals, we try to resolve them with the agents or the property owners where we can. It just creates more stability for your annual assessment roll.
I really appreciate that. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Councillor Helene.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Maurice. Most of us heard this last night at the regional district, and I just wanted to acknowledge that for the benefit of people watching who might be wondering if our lack of asking questions meant we weren't interested. Quite the contrary. And my condolences to you for the number of times you must have to present this to local government across the region. Thanks very much, and appreciate your work.
Oh, thank you. I will pass it on to my staff. I greatly appreciate that. Yeah, I don't mind doing this at all. It's good education for everybody and a good reminder once a year.
Fantastic. And maybe the last question that I have just was under the one number that you had under residential was about 13,418. And I just wondered if that number represents the number of units or the actual just physical structure. So an apartment building that might have 20 units, would that be considered one under that number, or would it be actually counting the units that people can live in?
That's actually a folio count. So that is all the folios on the assessment roll for the city of Courtenay is 13,418, up from 13,000. I misread that. There was 13,346 last year, and then we have subdivisions and new construction that come online. So that is the total number of folios for the city of Courtenay.
Okay, so if an apartment building is a condo where everybody pays taxes separately, they'd have their own folio. But if it's an apartment where everybody's renting and there's one owner, then it might be considered one
folio. Yeah, it's just a folio count, just to kind of look at, you know, how much growth there's been in a community. Yeah, that's a folio count. Yeah.
Fair enough. And just because when looking at that number in the 1,400 units that were built over the last 4 years, that seems like it's a pretty big jump. So, which I think you alluded to, is a lot of big work going on. And I would say probably, hopefully not all the good questions were asked last night, but I don't see any other questions coming up. So maybe with that, we'll let you have the rest of your evening.
Very well. Thank you very much. I do appreciate the invitation to come back. If you think of any subsequent questions, perhaps submit them through Adam, and I'll respond as soon as I'm able to.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Maurice, and looking forward to hearing from you probably about a year from now.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Right. Bye-bye. Mr. Garbutt.
Thank you, through Mayor Council. We had a good deal of activity over the holiday season, and Council had asked us to bring forward a brief on what's happening as it relates to snow and ice control inside the community. We have a very well developed program that's very effective. I believe Mr. Shaw is here to give a little bit of an overview, and Michael Wright is our manager of transportation services. That might be a new face to some of you with our organization. So, Mr. Shaw.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. I'm actually going to take this opportunity to introduce Michael Wright. Michael Wright is new to the city. He's been to the city for about 7 or 8 months now. We're pleased to have him. He's been a great addition to the team, and he's now looking after the transportation and fleet services groups within the city's public works services department. Michael's going to walk us through the presentation. He's been afforded a great deal of opportunity, as Mr. Garbutt alluded to, over his short time in the city with snow and ice control, working with our crews and our administrative team and our communications team to facilitate that level of service for our residents. So he's going to walk us through that, and then I just want to take this time and an opportunity really just to say thanks in part to our team, the staff, the communications team that we work hand in hand with, and everyone that's involved, including our contract services partners, to provide the level of service to our community. It takes a great deal of time and effort to orchestrate such an event, and Michael's done a fantastic job through that difficult time. But I obviously wanted to express my thanks to the groups, because it is a big deal, and it takes a lot. They take time away from their families to serve their community, and I want that to be recognized. So with that, I'll let Michael take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Wells and Council, for the opportunity to speak to the snow and ice control program here at the city of Courtenay. Next slide, please. Thanks. The purpose of our snow and ice control program is to maintain a safe transportation network that's efficient for vehicles, road users, and others during the winter months. So although weather patterns can be unpredictable at times, we are striving to make sure that the city meets its legislative requirements in addition to council's mandated levels of service. The main goal is preventing the accumulation of snow and ice or quickly removing it as is practically reasonable to increase safety, mobility, and improve commerce. Our operational priorities are established for all of the city roads, lanes, parking lots, sidewalks, and paved trail networks as are defined in our official community plan. And just a quick note that snow and ice control along provincial highways is managed by BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure and their contract services. Next slide, thanks. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the assets that are behind the program. We currently use a variety of both heavy equipment, small equipment, and different types of attachments, salters, and sanders. In 2022, we have 2 new pieces of equipment. One was a mini skid steer and attachment, and another one is a mini brine attachment. Those are being used primarily on the sidewalks. And we're awaiting delivery of 1 additional heavy equipment unit. In addition to this, we also have, as Kyle had mentioned, 28 staff that are working tirelessly behind the scenes, sort of stepping away from their lives at home during winter storms. And we're very appreciative to their work collaboratively with other departments, including communications. Thank you. This is a logic model, which is a visual representation of our resources and activities and the program's expected outcomes for our snow and ice control program. In terms of inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts, it flows. We have contracts. Key activities are listed there, everything from our pre-season preparations, safety and skills training, down to investigations and operational improvements. Key outputs include citizen satisfaction from resolving issues from our public inquiries and road user satisfaction from plowing and de-icing services and returning pavement to bare as soon as possible. Snow removal as well as another outcome, hauling snow out of primarily the downtown core. In terms of impacts, we are trying to reduce the disruption of essential activities such as attending school, medical appointments, collecting garbage, and providing police and emergency services. Purpose is maintaining quality of life for users across the transportation network. Next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of our levels of service for the program. It applies to our roads or sidewalks, paved trails, and parking lots that we're maintaining. The assets, the different variety of asset classes are listed along the left, everything from our arterial major roads, our paved trails. It describes when the city starts to apply products such as salt, sand, and brine. How many hours does it take us to do those routines? When do we start to plow? At what point has enough snow accumulated that we begin to clear on those different types of assets? How many hours does it take? And what is our targeted required outcome? And just a special note here in terms of the time to complete. This is related to after snow stops, so it may take multiple rounds in order for us to complete the program for the moment. And this is proven, this is achievable. Just wanted to note that we do this all the time. And at the same time, this is a best case scenario. Thanks. Next slide. So which streets do we clear? We clear in order of priority. We start with our major arterial roads. It also includes emergency service facilities, bus routes, and our downtown commercial area. We then move on to our minor collector roads, also streets with steep hills and school zones. And finally, we move on to our local roads, cul-de-sacs, and lanes. Next slide, please. This is a visualization of those road priorities. It's fairly colorful, but you can see the legend in the bottom listed from priority 1 to priority 4. These are all available on our website for the public to access and provide us with a means to create metrics that staff can follow. And it enables us to prioritize the deployment of various pieces of equipment, which are typically almost all tracked by GPS that we've installed in tablets that the operators carry with them. Next slide, please. So sidewalks are also important for our program. Pedestrians are out there also braving the weather. So we are clearing snow from our sidewalks, typically on high volume pedestrian routes where it's possible. This generally includes arterial roads, the downtown core, and also park frontages, transit areas, sidewalks that are adjacent to the emergency and municipal facilities in our areas, separated bike lanes, and prioritize paved walking trails. We also clear snow on sidewalks on collector roads where there are no residential homes and mechanical clearing is possible. This is a map, again, available on our website as public information in terms of which sidewalks are which priority. Just wanted you to notice in this that we're trying to ensure that they're connected logically and that they have major reach for our pedestrians to access. Next slide, please. So that essentially concludes the presentation. Next steps for the program is to update our policy. We'll be planning to do that in 2023. And I'll open it up to questions at this time. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Michael. Really appreciate your presentation, and I'll pass it over to Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks very much, Michael and Kyle. I really appreciate you preparing this presentation and coming forward. Of course, this is one of those issues that when it's happening, it's everybody's top priority, and now we've all forgotten about it. And hopefully we don't have to be reminded of it again this winter. Just before I make a few comments and ask a couple of questions, I want to say that I think in general the city staff do an excellent job, and we're really well served by our staff. And I've certainly noticed over the years not only improvements and ongoing good quality service, but the response to individual concerns that come up as they arise. Really appreciate that. But there are several issues that come up quite regularly, and I'm just going to hit on 2 or 3 of them. One of them is bus stops. You mentioned sidewalk clearing in relation to transit, but we regularly get concerns expressed about people's ability to get into bus stops, not only the area around the bus stop, but the sidewalks leading up to it. And that's an issue for people with mobility challenges as well as others. And I just wondered if you could comment on that at all.
Thank you for the question. So a part of our sidewalk clearing program does prioritize the bus stop areas. We're constantly receiving feedback both from public inquiries, as you've mentioned, and from BC Transit. So at times, depending on how the storm is unfolding, we're able to prioritize those, and at other times we are focusing our efforts in opening up the primary routes instead. But they are an issue that we're aware of, that we're actively trying to improve the level of service on.
Thanks. And another area where we had a lot of interest this year was along 17th Street, where the new sidewalk and bike lanes were installed. And one of the specific concerns was about the road being plowed so that the middle lanes were available, but the parking for cars on the outside of the bike lanes there, which people are still getting used to, I think, were not necessarily accessible. And there was a concern about that in terms of people not being able to carry out their business or get access to where they would normally park. And I just wondered if that came up as an issue for you.
Yeah, we've received some feedback from residents that are along 17th Avenue, concerned about the snow piling that occurs on the side of the road where we have to push the snow. It's a tricky issue, and it's sort of the first year that this is that design's been managed this way. So something that we'll be actively moving forward with, but ultimately the snow that accumulates on the road has to sort of go somewhere. If you would, potentially something that we could bring forward in the policy update for discussion is a review of the cost for hauling snow. It is a fairly expensive activity that the city uses contracted services for. So it would be worthwhile to see those numbers before we make a decision on changing the level of service. But ultimately, sort of the layout and where the curbs sit requires the snow to go somewhere. And right now that impacts the ability to park on the side of the roads for 17th.
Okay, and hauling of the snow, that's my third point. I noticed that after the major snow events, when we didn't have snow for a while, we still had piles of snow for quite a while. And I just wondered what our policy was in relation to getting rid of those piles of snow, including the one that piled up in front of my house with all sorts of gravel in it that I had to shovel myself. No, I'm only kidding about that. But no, you get what I'm saying, though. There was a fair amount of snow piles on streets like Fitzgerald in the middle of intersections and such. And I just wondered, given I know people work around the clock when the snow event is taking place, but I'm just wondering what happens after that in the aftermath in terms of getting rid of those accumulations.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So we execute the activities to haul snow out of the downtown core primarily after the snow has finished falling. So if the event is several days in a row, crews will continue to plow the roads to the center, and those snow piles in the center will accumulate until we know that there's not another 10 or 15 centimeters. And then the snow is removed at night to lower the effect on transportation networks for traffic flow. And along Fitzgerald specifically, we're looking at potentially changing the way that the snow accumulates in the center and plowing to the sides, because the road design has changed there. That hasn't yet been implemented, though.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Hilling, and Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I love this report. I think it's great. I think it would be awesome if we could compile this before snow season next year in a more simplified way to get out to citizens. Yeah, I mean, I would say that certainly we get calls and emails with concerns, but I also hear a lot of good feedback about our snow removal. One thing I wanted to mention is more communication around what are Modi roads as well could be helpful, because I know we heard a lot about Ryan Hill this past, it was really slick. I know that I was up near Anderton and Ryan, and I was fine with my vehicle, but people were sliding all over the place. So that might be good to highlight as well. Who to call, not the city of Courtenay. And you mentioned the citizen satisfaction from issue response, and you obviously compile the feedback that you get. Hopefully you do get some positive feedback. It would be helpful to sort of gauge that from year to year as well. And I wondered if you're able to provide anything at any point in terms of a synopsis of the feedback that you received and how you dealt with it and the follow-up. And I wanted to also do a shout out to our communications people, because I'd say over the last 2 winters, that's really ramped up in terms of really good communication on social media, which I think has helped a lot. And the other thing I wanted to mention was there was also some confusion around sanding versus salting versus brining, and some people didn't even know, oh, is the city even doing sanding, what's happening? So I thought that chart was really helpful as well. So I would say that this information you prepared for us, it would be really helpful to maybe chunk that up and put it in some communications for next time around, or even in some kind of summary report that could go out. I know that our communications people are highlighting some of the things that we talk about at council. So just going back to that one piece about citizen satisfaction, is there anything you can tell me about that in terms of our tracking and whether we can actually see, positive outcomes from that, and maybe some of those complaints or feedback not coming back the following year?
Year over year. Yeah, so all of our public inquiries, thanks for the question, are tracked with the electronic system that allows staff to gather the information from the callers or those giving the feedback. It's classified under snow and ice control, so we're able to collect and report on that. It's not something that's regularly done. It's sort of potentially might skew information a little bit, because year over year, you may see a reduction in inquiries, but that could be related to weather. And it also potentially doesn't represent all concerns and interests in a statistically relevant way. So could also be skewed for that reason, but our ability, it certainly allows us to see where the issues are, what's reoccurring, what the root causes are, and all of that is routed back to operational improvements. Each storm, we try and apply our lessons learned and make our program more effective and efficient.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it certainly does vary if the weather's different from one year to the next, but even maybe those things that you can identify that you've made an improvement and you're seeing a positive outcome from that. And sometimes that's a new piece of equipment or whatever. I did forget one thing, and it was around 17th Street. Did hear a bit of feedback around the bump outs and being covered in snow and people hitting the bump outs, the new bump outs that people weren't familiar with, and just wondered if you had any thoughts about that or any way to mitigate that next time around.
That's a tricky one. I would say that we're actively reviewing how the winter control program is executed on 17th. There's a couple different ways that we're working with the design there on the sidewalks and the bike lanes, and then the snow in the parking areas that was mentioned earlier. The bump outs, there are some concerns about whether or not they can be seen. So we typically put up pylons or markers for the trucks to see. And there's been a bit of a conversation going about any changes that could be applied to make it a little bit more aware for road users to make sure it is safe and effective. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And whenever you have a change in the traffic pattern or things like that, you run into that kind of stuff. You put in a four-way that wasn't there before, whatever. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the questions, Councillor Moore and Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation, and for, I think, the public, this is actually really empowering. I think especially the table that provides details for different neighborhoods and citizens and understanding when and how and where. I have a few pieces of interest. I noted that on the slide around when to salt and plow at the top, the data around the amount of roads that we have, sidewalks, paved trails, and parking lots. I think that was new for me, at least. And one of the things that I found interesting is the prioritization of paved trails. Is there or has there been any opportunity for us to communicate out to the community when the paved trails are in fact plowed. And I know that one of the key things that becomes an issue is that, especially for some of our folks in the community that have accessibility issues or seniors, when there is a snow event, they're restricted to walk their dogs or to get out, and they're homebound. And so I think that if there's an opportunity for us to communicate out which trails are in fact plowed, that we can encourage people to get out during a snow event to continue to engage in exercise and activities that are supportive for their well-being. So that's my first question. And just while I have the floor, the other piece around this graphic specifically for the sidewalks and the paved trails is in the last column. The outcome speaks to safe and passable. Does safe and passable include, does that mean that we're meeting specific accessibility standards, as in if there are citizens who are accessing those sidewalks or trails with a walker or wheelchair, is that considered something that would be possible for them to continue to be able to access? Or what's our definition of passable?
So rather than too bare pavement, often packed snow is an outcome. I'll speak to that question first. And the sidewalks, in terms of safe and passable, would represent not down to bare, but it's a different outcome based on the equipment that we're using, a little bit smaller. In terms of communicating out when paved trails are opened up and safe to access again for those who have different needs. I think that's a great idea. Certainly something that wouldn't be too hard to implement. So moving forward, we can definitely work on that.
Great. Yeah. And the other slide that I found really helpful was the level of priority for the roads. I'm wondering, has there been any thought, and I know that's mentioned here specifically around the sidewalks within the DCBIA region, but has there been a mapping out of the prioritization? I know to Councillor Hillian's question, you answered the areas around bus stops, but have we gone through an exercise in establishing a prioritization of sidewalks specifically not related to bus stops or to the DCBIA region?
Yes, so the last map, and I'd have to apologize, it's a little bit gray. This is available on the public on our website for winter control. And this would illustrate which sidewalks are being cleared and the priorities move down in terms of 1, 2, 3s, and then walkways as well. So we would start on the 2s after we're finished the 1s and start on the 3s after we're done the 2s.
Yeah, thank you. And just one more question, Mayor, if that's okay.
Okay. Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Okay, great. I know that in early November, we had a tour of the Public Works facilities, and it was really great to see all of our assets. That first slide of the images, or maybe the second slide with the images of our assets. I'm wondering if you can speak, because there's a lot of conversation around, the feedback that we get from citizens around our assets and what do we have in our repertoire when there is a snow event. And I'm wondering if you can speak to maybe some comparators between us and other communities of relative similar size, population, and the density of our community specifically. One of the things that I really appreciated on that tour was the preemptive thought that was put in by staff around the preparation for a snow event months ahead of time, which I think maybe is something that is maybe not as understood in the community, that there's actually a lot of planning that goes in months before we get to the winter season, and how the assets are managed in preparation for that. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that.
And sorry, I mean, it's
comparatively to other communities in terms of our assets.
Did you want to jump in on that? Thanks.
I'll jump in. Thank you for the question, Councillor Joel Lecor. Comparatively speaking, I think we don't necessarily have statistical data to say 1-to-1 what our relationship is relative to assets, to community size, to lane kilometers. It's certainly something we could seek in terms of interest, anecdotally in conversation through some of the other operations managers and those consultative groups, of how we work collaboratively to understand and create better practices across our jurisdictional areas. We know that we are very well supported relative to our assets. And that is in two ways. One, in the number of assets that we currently have ready for deployment, but also in the acquisition of those assets. The assets that we look to acquire in our community for the services that we provide, we look to seek multifunctional assets. So they can be deployed through a multitude of seasons to provide impact to all services that we provide to our community. So much of the equipment that you see has multitude of attachments that work both in the season for cutting grass or moving leaves, and then putting on blades or other sorts of attachments that we find to be very effective to provide the snow and ice control removal within our community. Being that we're a bit north on the island, we sometimes are accustomed to more snowfall. The snowfall's been sticking around a little bit longer than I think most of us would have been accustomed to later or earlier in our lives. But that is the change in the impact of the environment. And so we continue to drive those changes and be smart in the approach of our asset acquisition. And maybe if I can speak just a little bit to the accessibility relative to sidewalks and bus stops, the addition of additional assets, and you'll see that the mini skid steer that being able to acquire an asset that provides us with an opportunity to get to areas that we wouldn't otherwise been able to successfully get to in years past is now affording us that opportunity to provide those opportunities for success within the service delivery model. And so we continue to grow, we continue to challenge ourselves and our staff to ask, can we do better with less and oftentimes with a little bit more, and then strive for that success. And that works in partnership with our neighboring municipalities and in share agreements, but also through contract services, where we're able to augment our staff with supportive measures to obtain these service levels.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Garvey, yeah.
Thank you. Through council, I anticipate a few more questions. I was just going to try and sum up just a little bit. We are not a winter city. I come from a winter city, but we've established our service levels and have made some choices about the types of equipment and great relations we have with private contractors so we can rapidly deploy. One of the things that I think we will need to be cognizant of, we are talking a lot about climate change in a warming trend. We're also, and then heavy rains, but the intensity and duration of some of our snowfalls are really starting to accumulate. And these are things that we're tracking as staff, and through our deliberations with council on budget, setting level of service relative to our community's requirement. Some of you may have seen last year, I think they had a bit of a joking response in Prince George through their Twitter saying, this is unbelievable and cool your jets and we'll get to it. It was a little flippant, but the reality is we do have to manage that. These are all service levels and they all cost money. And I think it's our job as staff is to really start to track and where we're heading. And if we need to start to change and have a level of service requirements and changes that need to be funded, that's our job to bring it to. And council has been extremely responsive in every type of situation where we've tracked and come forward. As it currently stands, we seem to be getting hit with these events when we're extreme, holiday season that we had staff, I think, Mr. Shaw working on Christmas Day, Christmas Eve and Boxing Day last year. We didn't have those. We had Christmas Eve this year, so we do have a limited ability, just like the rest of the community. I really appreciate the discussion with council. I think it's excellent. We can always communicate better, and we can be there earlier. But council has really been giving us some great guidance, particularly over the last year and a half in terms of where we need to head. And at a staff level, we're certainly be tracking this. We're acquiring new assets, and I don't mean the rolling assets, but the configuration of parking areas, bike lanes, our roadways. We're going to be having different types of drainage installed, and these all have factors of maintenance that are heavily influenced by climate. So stay tuned, and we keep really good data, and we'll keep council in the loop on this, because we will be having to change our operations, and they may or may not require additional resources. But I won't get the last word. I don't want to have the last word, but I did want to really acknowledge the level of effort from our staff as well as our contractors who are also out there in the dark of night and the early morning providing these services. And council's been very, very complimentary. I just wanted to echo that. We've reached out and spoken with our staff, but I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mr. Garbutt. And over to Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, a couple of points. First of all, I'll look forward to further report in relation to what we might do differently on 17th. I think particularly with a new asset, one where there was considerable controversy, if we can come up with some ways to make that flow better. We just increased the community support for the original project. There were some people who were concerned about snow clearing, and right now they're feeling that those concerns were upheld, and I'd like to see us come up with a way that we could perhaps do better there. And I realize we're never going to be perfect. We're prey to the elements in that. The other thing I wanted to ask about though was the sidewalks that people are either unable to clear themselves or in fact don't clear themselves because our sidewalk clearing is limited. I'm just wondering how many complaints we might get in relation to uncleared sidewalks, and we have obviously a pretty limited ability to respond. It's a bylaw issue, but I'm just wondering where things stood with that this winter.
Great, it's a fair question. Thank you, Councillor Hillian. Sidewalks are obviously a level of service that has continued to grow. Not only within the ability for the city to deliver sidewalk clearing and prioritization, but also within the community. The desire to be out and walking and have the fresh air and the environment is obviously is always a priority. And we encourage our residents to partake in that snow removal with us, because we don't have the equipment or the person power to go out and do every single asset within our community. So we do prioritize that, but we also understand and respect that there are limitations to that. There are volunteer companies or organizations that offer those services in conjunction with those, and we have that information over at our Public Works office that we often share, and we encourage neighbors to work together to provide that access where practicable. But again, as you'll see through as we continue to grow as an organization and as a city, as we continue to grow to gain more assets, we try to create more connectivity and more opportunities for people to commute through our city other than within a vehicle. And then you'll see through our mapping, and that's our goal, to continue to broaden and expand upon those. And you're right in terms of specifics, though, for people that choose to do or not to do, it really falls down to looking at potential bylaws or opportunities to encourage communication and education and how we might be able to collectively as a group participate in removal of snow on ice on sidewalks.
Fair enough, thanks.
And Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll be brief because we've been on this for a while, but I did want to weigh in. I don't have any questions. I think the presentation was great and covered a lot of bases. And I appreciate Councillor Jellicoe's suggestion of providing a means of knowing what the status is of some of our popular multi-use paths, because I've wondered the same thing after a snowfall, whether or not, the air park's clear for a walk around when the sun's out and the snow's on the ground. So if that would be an easy thing to implement, I'm also supportive of that suggestion. I think it's a good one. I wanted to provide a little bit of feedback that I've heard in the community. A lot of folks have noticed that new skidder and brine machine and have commented on how great it is to see how much less icy it was on the 5th Street walkway and bike lanes. It was covered in ice last year after our cold snap, and it just kind of stayed there, and we didn't really have a piece of equipment more than spreading the hard salt. So I noticed that improvement, and I certainly heard about it from the community too. I also noticed an improvement in the areas that we plow down in the Puntledge area just to access the Puntledge Park area and the bus route. And I also had people comment on how nice it was to see those sidewalks cleared with city equipment. And when we're going forward and looking at our policy and whether or not we want to expand service, I would say I think we get a very good level of service here, and our perception about snow clearing service is very relative to our past experience. I came from Victoria. There's basically no service. And prior to that, living on a Gulf island, also very little service. And a lot of the expectations that we receive from residents around snow clearing are from people with experience in much colder communities, because a lot of people move out here for the nicer climate after having lived in colder parts of Canada. So I think we do need to manage that in some way. And if we're looking at adding resources to our snow and ice clearing, I'm supportive of focusing on those places where we're helping people that don't have other means of getting around, like the bus stops and our transportation corridors. And I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Excellent. And I don't see any other lights at this moment in time. It's been a great conversation. I think, again, the last 2 seasons have really kind of brought us to the forefront, just with not just the extra snow, but having snow events in rapid succession, which obviously stresses the whole system. And I just, again, giving my voice of support. The vast majority of the comments that I get are actually more positive than negative. When people have said that, maybe plowing wasn't done at all. It's great that we have a GPS system that actually we can say it was done on this day at this time, and just to have that confidence, which I think we do, is great. And then the one word that I think we've heard time and time again is snow gates, which is different than Watergate, but the whole idea of whether or not that's a possibility and what the cost implications are, which I think will be part of that longer conversation. So thanks again. And with that, I think somebody moved this, so I'll any opposition to receiving it? See none. All right, you guys can sneak away, as it were. Yeah, thanks again. Really
And
appreciate
as the
it.
customary, if I may, as it always is in Public Works, when we talk about snow and ice control, we knock on wood after we're done. So thank you.
Excellent. All right, as long as we have enough shovels to go around. Next, we have the structural change to and hours for Ace Brewery at 6.1.1. If somebody would like to move that, or we can just pass it over to staff and come back. Maybe we'll do that. Do you want to use your magic mic there? And then I always feel bad. There you go.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Mayor and Council. Ms. Goddard is here to do a short introduction on this report and is available for questions.
Good evening, through the mayor to council. Yes, the application before you is from the Liquor and Cannabis Regulations Branch, and it's for Ace Brewing at 150 Mansfield Drive. And the core elements of their application to that branch, which we are, well, I'll explain the process after, but the core elements of their application are to make permanent an existing temporary patio, increase the total occupancy inside and outside from 140 to 215 patrons. That's an increase in 75 spots, all of which would be located in the new patio, which is actually an existing temporary patio. And then to change the hours of liquor sales from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Sunday to Thursday, and 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. Friday to Saturday. Change those to 9 a.m. to 1 a.m. 7 days a week. So as I mentioned, there is a temporary patio there. You can see it on your drawing on page 3, and the proposal is to make it permanent. It was allowed to be a temporary during the in 2020, the temporary expanded service areas under the COVID-19 social distancing requirements. So that's why it exists there today, but it has not been formalized permanently, which is the application. And just about form and character, it's not large enough to trigger a form and character permit. And we have referred it to some other enforcement bodies such as RCMP and City Bylaw Department. No comments, or rather no concerns identified. And then just in terms of the process, under the Liquor Control and Licensing Act, the local government must gather the views of residents when the applicant has given the local government notice of the application, which obviously they've done. And the local government may determine which method is best to gather those views. They provide a number of options, and one of them is quite flexible. And so the current practice is to advertise a notice on the city's website and additionally provide a mail out notice to neighbors on a case-by-case basis. And we do recommend that we do this additional mail out in this instance because we see that there have been 2 previous liquor license applications for Ace Brewing, as well as Whistle Stop Pub has had one, and all of them have garnered some public interest. So we thought we'd do that extra notice to them. So a 30-meter notice from the property boundaries of the property. So that's it in an essence. Ultimately, what happens is we're proposing that on February 22nd, all the findings from the public views would be presented to yourselves, and then you could decide if council would like to endorse this application to the Liquor Cannabis Regulation Branch. And what we do is we provide a letter, you provide a letter, staff put it together, and let them know in particular any your support or your concerns, and if there's concerns, to be very specific in what those concerns are. And ultimately it's the decision maker of the province and one of their one of their staff. So I hope that gives an overview, but if there's questions, I'm available.
Thanks very much for the report. I guess that I've got a couple questions while I'm waiting for some lights to come on. And the first one would be just sort of whether or not there have been any complaints to bylaw since the last adjustment.
Yeah, I did actually, we checked with bylaw division, and the comments, I think there was one in the last, number X amount of months. I don't have the figure right in front of me, but it was not a high volume.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I'll just start by saying that I really appreciate the work of staff on this, and the proponent's letter is really supportive to provide some context, and appreciate the time that staff have given me with some of the questions that I've had on this application. I guess to start off by saying that I find it challenging that we're being asked to consider within the same application 2 things that I view as very different. One being moving something that was temporary, where there's an established kind of consensus in the community, and the proponents kind of spoken at length specifically about the importance of the temporary structure moving to permanent. And I really appreciate the economic lens and the employment opportunities specific to making those structural pieces of the business more permanent. But having that lumped in with something that is new, which is the extension of the hours that will be available for the purchase and sale of alcohol, I find it quite challenging. And so one of the things that I'd like for us to consider tonight is looking at moving those 2 things separately through a motion. But I'll just start by sharing some of my comments, and then I have some questions for staff as well that I know some have been answered, but just for the public record. And the mayor has alluded to it, and the proponent speaks to it in her letter around there being no RCMP calls. Is there any way for us to verify whether or not that is in fact correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we're able as a city to be able to get bylaw, but we're able to verify. Do we have that?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. No, not in front of us. The purpose of this is to have a referral for information from the public. We can come back to council. Should council want to send the notification, we can come back with some clarification on that. Staff are keeping notes.
Great. And then staff had noted in the presentation and in the report that the recommendation to go to the public and the neighbors as one of the reasons why was because there was feedback provided the last time there was business licenses for liquor sales in the neighborhood. I'm wondering if staff happen to know what the general consensus from those the feedback at that time was.
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Jolicoeur, I'm afraid I don't have all the details right in front of me. I certainly can follow up on those past files at another time.
Okay, thanks. You're starting to skip a little bit. So if it continues, and we ask you to turn your video off just in case your bandwidth is going crazy, but I'll pass it back to Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, and just one of the questions, I did get some clarification, but just for the record, because it mentions in the staff report 45 meters nearest residents, and then the recommendation is for notification for residents, or sorry, for neighbors, which I assume is both businesses and private residents, for 30 meters. So just to clarify, those units, the residential units across the street would fall within that 30 meters. So both the Mansfield condos there and then the kind of strip mall with residences upstairs.
Yeah, through the mayor to council, definitely the properties immediately across the Trumpeter Landing, they're definitely within the 30 meter. I'm just wanting to do a quick measurement here to make sure that the strip mall is as well. I'm pretty sure it is. If you don't mind waiting a moment, or I can circle back and answer that just while I pull some lines here. But I can get back to you on that. Did you catch my answer from the previous question? I understand I got cut off there.
I think it came through. The skips were just at the right time. So I think we missed some maybe unnecessary information, but the actual answers I think came through loud and clear.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe just as you're looking into that, Nancy, I'll just add, so my comments around the hours and hopes for us to be able to separate them. The city's committed to moving through with the process with the Comox Valley Substance Use Strategy and in the phase 1 report. And it's internationally recognized that one of the ways that we can reduce harm from alcohol is access to alcohol. And access to alcohol more broadly in the literature speaks to what it sounds like, the availability, the location, the proximity to people, and the time and the amount of hours that alcohol is able to be purchased. And so I recognize that we're going to be presented a phase 2 of that report and eventually a phase 3. But in that phase 1 report, it did specifically mention the impacts, disproportional impacts of alcohol in our community more than any other substance. On the economy, on our healthcare system, in workplaces, on families, domestic violence, suicide, and other forms of violence and injury. And so that's my context of my reservations around the issue of extending the hours of sale of alcohol. And I'll leave it at that and see what others have to say. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Councillor Jolicoeur. And next we have Councillor Morin.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, actually, what Councillor Jolicoeur brought up was something I was going to talk about as well. Back in 2018, we did have Dr. Charmaine Enns do a presentation, and it was around how alcohol consumption actually had resulted in nearly 20% hospitalization in the Comox Valley. And there was talk about implementing policy that would limit, as Councillor Jolicoeur described. I know that this recommendation would be looking at public feedback around the patio aspect. I don't have I would obviously wait to see that feedback. I like the idea of the patio becoming permanent. I think that's a great thing, but I also share the concern about having the increase in hours and lumping these two together, and the substance use strategy, absolutely, as Councillor Jolicoeur talked about, is trying to bring a bit more attention to the harms of alcohol, which have been mentioned. And then, of course, we just had the recent research highlighted around the low risk drinking guidelines. And that's kind of adds to my concern about this. So, I mean, I'd be supportive of splitting these up actually as well. But I think that it is something that we should listen to the experts on. Our medical health officer is bringing us the information to help us base decisions on. And so I would support some of the points that Councillor Jolicoeur made. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Moore and Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. A couple of points. First of all, when this liquor license originally was awarded, there was feedback from neighbors, not just about the license, but about the existence of the establishment itself. They were concerned about traffic, and they were also concerned about noise and people late at night. And I don't know whether that has proved a problem or not. I would share the concern that the hours is it may be an issue, but that's something that based on what sort of feedback we get from the public, we have the ability to send forward some sort of recommendation to the liquor control branch in relation to that. So I don't see any need to split that. And on that basis, I would move the recommendation that based on the January 25th, 2023 staff report, structural change to liquor license application and change to hours of liquor service to liquor license application, Ace Brewing Company, 150 Mansfield Drive. Council approve option 1 and direct staff to publish notice on the city's website for 2 weeks requesting public input on the proposed structural change to a liquor primary license for council consideration at a future meeting, and provide a mail-out notification to neighbors within 30-meter radius of all property lines.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. It's on the table, and Councillor Hillian, just given the conversation here, I mean, right now we're just asking for public feedback, but the actual voting to approve or not approve could still be separated out. This is really just saying for the purposes of getting feedback, it can come together. And so I'm just trying to make sure everyone kind of gets that sense that we're not lumping them together for the entirety, but we can actually suss that out when we actually get that feedback from staff. With that, Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't planning on speaking to this, but I do want to respond to the comments that Councillor Jolicoeur and Warren have made. I'm certainly in agreement with the impacts of having, more access to alcohol in our community, and that we often underemphasize just how many negative impacts come out of people abusing alcohol as a substance, strictly because it is a regulated thing that we do as a society. I think really have our blinders on about some of that. But with regards to this specific application, I don't know that limiting the timing of alcohol sales in one establishment when there's another one right next door that's open to 2 a.m. is really going to provide much of a difference there, other than having people who want to continue on with their evening shuffling over to the place next door. And so I don't know if saying that we're not supportive of liquor establishments being open later really moves the dial in that direction at all. Also, full disclosure, I have a family member that lives across the road from Ace Brewery and has lived there for a couple of years and has zero complaints about anything that goes on there, but she frequently raises concerns about what happens at 2 a.m. when the liquor establishment next door closes its doors, as well as the comings and goings from the cold beer and wine and the traffic and the loud motorcycles. So I do believe that there are some concerns in that neighborhood, but it's not really specific to the business that's asking for this at this time, but I do think hearing some public commentary and input from the neighborhood will really help guide the decision when this comes back. So I'm happy to support it for now, and I hope that we can get some more insight into how it's going in that neighborhood.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum. And I'll maybe just make one comment just based on this conversation. It was something that I'd written down when you were first talking, Nancy, and maybe it's possible, like when the information comes back, to get a sense of how many of the liquor establishments in the city of Courtenay have the hours, so that we can kind of get a sense of, like, you know, is there precedence for one thing or the other, and that might help council even come up with a policy or something in longer term. Did you have a subsequent, Councillor McCollum? In 1 second.
Yeah, sorry. I just had one other comment that I wanted to make that I forgot. Just that I hear a lot in the community about the lack of places to hold events. And part of what makes the events feasible is that the establishment is able to serve their customers for long enough to make the economics of that work. And a lot of people are heading up to the Waverly is basically the only live place to see events, and part of this hours extension is specifically because they want to provide more of that. And I do think that that is something that we want and hear about a lack of in Courtenay. So that was the other thing I wanted to tie into that. Thanks.
All right, thanks for that clarification. And Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the things that the proponent does speak to that, the events, and I think that's a really important factor, I guess, from a public health perspective. I mean, I've been to this establishment many times. It's a great place. And I have been there past the hour of when they're serving liquor, and there are still people there. And so I think that the events can still occur when alcohol is not being sold. I think that's kind of a misnomer, that there has to be alcohol being sold just to have an event. But the other thing I was going to say in my request to seeing if there was a possibility for us to separate these two things was that, and I agree with Councillor Moore, and I have not really any issues with the structural component of this, but given that the one component being the hours is a new consideration for the neighborhood, and I see from the staff report, and Nancy mentioned it, from past practice, and we don't have from my conversations with staff, a policy around how to move forward with public feedback on this. It's just a past practice that, given that it's a new consideration, that 2 weeks, feels really tight. For sending out mail outs, I understand that we're giving them a period of time to receive the mail out and then be able to participate through our website. But I guess wondering if in fact we're looking at the motion that's on the table, seeing if there is an appetite for a friendly amendment to extend the 2-week period to 4 weeks. So I'd be looking to the mover and the seconder on that.
Well, you moved it. You're looking for a seconder.
I didn't move it. I think Doug did. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Councillor Hillian.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with extending it longer, as long as that's within our bounds to do that. No problem.
All right. Sorry, I thought you were moving the amendment, not the friendly amendment thing. Is still kind of, it's not my comfort zone. But yeah, so that's good. So that's been pushed to 4 weeks. Yeah.
Sorry, through council, Ms. Goddard, do we have if we're establishing this, do we have the ability to extend?
Yeah, through the CAO to Mayor and Council, I did speak to liquor control staff today. They pointed out that we can ask for an extension of up to 3 months. I can't quite remember exactly when their application started, but the liquor control branch has a certain timeline. They wish to have decisions made, but they can offer an extension. So what you're referring to, even if we're on the cusp of the the liquor branch application being almost expired, we can get an extension. That's no problem. It's very easy to do. So the timeline can be adjusted from that perspective. If I may answer some of the questions earlier on the topic of the distance, the radius and the notification. It does, 30 meters does cover the strip mall area that was being asked about on Cliff. In terms of community comments, I think the most recent report at the time when the first patio was being proposed is from May 11th, 2020. And there are all the public comments are written in there. You can see them in the appendix. So you could see that there indeed certain councillors here remember correctly, noise and things like that were mentioned as core concerns, but there's nuance in there. So I would recommend, if you're very keen, reading them. But this is also a different application.
All right, thanks for those bits of information. Mr. Garvey, did you have a follow-up?
If I may, just understanding from the discussion in the notice that we provide people, I think we would identify expanded space and time change, and we could ask that people provide us feedback on both of those matters. I would note that the city of Courtenay has decided to be involved in the engagement process related to liquor license applications, so we can tailor it to what we think is here. I would note the policy section of all of our staff reports is extremely important. And as it currently stands, we don't actually have any guiding policies. I would say if council endorses the subsequent work of the substance abuse strategy, that would provide us guidance. In any recommendations going forward. So this recommendation is to provide notification and find out what people think in the absence of any policy direction. So I just wanted to provide that for you.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that. And Councillor Moore.
Yeah, thank you for another opportunity. I just wanted to kind of qualify some of the things that I said, particularly in response to Councillor McCollum. I absolutely, excuse me, would not want a business to be unduly, in a different situation from a business right next to it, and there be that inequity piece there, and absolutely support small business, and definitely like to patronize these places and appreciate the events that go on there. So I just wanted to make that really clear. And I think that this just brought up for me that it is worth at some point having a conversation about this. And maybe that's in relation to the substance use strategy. Just to, I think it's always important to bring awareness to this kind of stuff, because as Councillor McCollum mentioned, we do kind of minimize the impact of alcohol use in the community. And we know that it absolutely is the most harmful substance in addition to nicotine. And as Dr. Enns reported, we had 20% more hospitalization due to alcohol. And I think that those are things that need to be considered. But I also would not want a business to be impacted unfairly. So so I'm supportive of the motion. Thank you.
Excellent. I think that's been a great conversation. And I think we do have a motion on the floor. I think there's some clarity that's been given to staff. So I'll just call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Excellent. And we'll move into development variance for 377 Lyric Road. Mr. Garvey.
Thank you. Also, Ms. Goddard is going to give an overview of this file as well. And I don't know if the applicant is joined this meeting. I know they had a bit of a time constraint.
Yeah, through the CAO to Mayor and Council, it does appear that we do have Jonathan Calderwood still on the call. So thank you, Jonathan. I'll give some opening remarks, and then if there's some technical questions for the sign business here, Grant Signs, which Jonathan's representing, you can follow up. Yes, in essence, very briefly, it is to permit an oversized electronic message board sign in a location where there is an existing sign of similar dimensions, but not electronic message board. And so there are a number of variances. This is also, I realize I didn't mention, at the Comox Valley Aquatic Center. So the first is the sign area and height. So just in terms of size, they are proposing something that's larger than our bylaw standards, however, is roughly equivalent to what you see there today. And then number of freestanding signs, there is a bylaw requirement, only one is permitted, but in reality, there are actually 3 signs throughout the entire property, some older signs before bylaw. And then some minor, very minor sign location, just a little bit closer to the road property line than is normally allowed. But also still the existing footprint. And then the sign area for the electronic component, requesting that it be increased from 40% of the total sign area to 40.7. So quite a minor change there. Just a reminder too that electronic message board signs are only permitted in the public assembly uses and not on commercial uses. And then finally, the last variance is to allow for the color display, not the monochromatic display that is the bylaw requirement. I do understand the sign technology is changing out there, the industry is changing, and that's actually quite difficult to get sign replacement parts for monochromatic signs, apparently. So, and a sign, actually, to give you a little context, North Island College has a similar sign that was approved in 2018, and is also with the color as well. So, I think that gives the overview. So, questions?
Well, thanks very much, Nancy. And yeah, we've that's generated some questions. We'll start with Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you, Nancy. I was just looking at the sort of the reasons for our bylaw, and one of them is to make things more aesthetically pleasing. And as I look at the 2 signs, I think I'd probably say that the newer sign is perhaps more aesthetically pleasing than the existing one. The other concern, I think, was the larger one is over road safety. And as you were mentioning, there was a nearly identical sign approved near the beginning of the last term for North Island College. And I was just wondering if we have any sense of whether there's been any increased concerns over accidents or any safety concerns expressed during the last 4 years since the North Island College sign on that same stretch of road using the same technology was installed.
Through the CAO to council. I'm personally not aware of some RCMP or other stats that would break that down to sign distraction. I don't know if someone else on staff might maybe have better knowledge of the stats. Perhaps not.
Through council to, or the mayor to Councillor Cole Hamilton, we are for notification, and we can find out if there's been some accident statistics in that regard from the RCMP.
Okay, thank you. I mean, anecdotally, it doesn't seem that there have been particular concerns about the North Island College sign, but I think that would be useful to get some follow-up. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton. And yeah, anecdotally, I live right there and I'm driving by it quite a lot. It certainly is more attention getting. And it's already in a high traffic accident zone up there, but I haven't seen anything specifically right around that point. But yeah, anecdotally. That being said, Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just start off by saying again, thank you to staff for spending some time on this with me and answering some questions and for the report. And I'm happy that the proponent is here as well. On page 2 of the staff report, it specifically speaks to in the paragraph next to the image, the last 2 sentences around what will be on the board, the content, and then around the messages and the transferring of messages remaining static for 10 seconds and will not be scrolling, fading, or flashing or animated display. So my first question for staff is, how do we enforce that? And is that enforceable? It's in the staff report, but I don't necessarily see it within the bylaw. And so I'm wondering if we can just get some clarity on that.
Yeah, through the CAO to council, yeah, indeed, as you mentioned, it's these are provisions that are embedded right in the core of the bylaw. And so if someone is not meeting the aspect of no scrolling, fading, flashing animated display, and there have to be the 10 seconds, then there is an enforcement piece to that with our our bylaw division. I was just going to double check if it's a municipal ticket information, if we have the ticket power. I believe that the sign bylaw is a ticketable offense. I mean, in any event, we do reach out to the owner of properties when they are in contravention of those animation restrictions. And I can't think of any examples personally where that's been a challenge on the public assembly properties. I understand everybody wishes to comply.
Yeah. I'm guessing in the bylaw, it's number 5 around applicable requirements, standards and guidelines that would fall under.
That's correct. Yeah, there's a whole host of other kinds of conditions within the sign bylaw that we don't expressly embed within the variance permit itself, but it is clear that the entirety of the sign bylaw otherwise must be adhered to.
Just have 2 more questions. The proponent in his package or their package had some beautiful images of what looks like children swimming underwater in color. And so I'm wondering if staff can speak to whether that was just how we can rectify what's been proposed in the proponent's application and what we've just spoken about around it simply being content with words, time, temperature, event details.
Yeah, through the CAO to council, I agree that that information could be misleading. The fact that there's a picture there, the technology does permit for those types of images to be shown, including animations, but it's our bylaw that restricts it, and therefore it is an enforcement matter. So it could just be the freedom of showing what potentially could be shown on a sign, even though if we're not allowing it. I don't know if Jonathan wishes to speak at all more to the submission materials themselves and intention. If Jonathan's still on the call there.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi.
Sorry, you're asking about the image, whether
Yeah.
there's going to be image content or whatever's going to be on there. Essentially, the video display will display video if somebody wanted to use it that way. But of course, the bylaw restricts that. If the bylaw allows for just copy, and that's what the requirement is, then that's what.
Okay.
The North Island College has the identical sign, and it has the same capability. But as far as I know, they've never used it for anything other than copy. And I don't operate it, so I just maintain it, and they're in charge of content.
And I can probably verify again anecdotally living right there that I don't see anything. And comparatively, for anybody who's been downtown Victoria at their I can't remember if it's Staples Place or whatever they call their Save-On maybe. There's a lot of video and it's massive. And this, I think this bylaw takes care of that. Any subsequent questions?
Yeah, just the last question around variance request number 5, the monochromatic display. Can staff speak to other facilities, recreation or otherwise, where we do not have, where we have color in this case? My understanding in the community from what I see driving around is most of our facilities do have the monochromatic messages. And so I'm just wondering what makes this, why this request is coming in if in fact most of our facilities do follow the bylaw in this case.
Mr. Garrett.
Thank you.
I might be able to answer that.
If I may, first, through the Mayor to Councillor Jolicoeur's request, we have a changeable copy sign on the Lewis Center. It is monochromatic. I believe that the Isfeld Secondary has a monochromatic display as well. The North Island College has a multicolor display, which would, I believe, have been the subject of the variance approval in that case. But other institutional users have followed our bylaw terms. However, that's why the bylaw includes variance. I mean, there's the ability to vary these items. That's why the legislation permits it.
And John, did you want to follow up as well?
Yes, please. The Lewis Center, we provided that sign, and that was from a company called Daktronics out of the United States. They do manufacture chromatic, but they've stepped away from manufacturing monochromatic signs. They do make parts available for that sign, but most, not all new signs are full color unless they have a gas price on them. The Marquesfeld School, we manufactured that one as well. That's an old one that has been damaged twice, and it's at the point where it's unusable because someone vandalized it and destroyed it. And we are trying to rebuild the existing boards because they don't make replacement is going to be a color system. So we're probably at that stage where we have to contact city administration and ask for permission to color board in there unless the school board decides that, you know, you can program them to just run one color and knows that it's not one color. You can make it, but it's all the systems that we make and all the systems that are in use now are full color systems. So it's like, I can't really compare what it is to, but all the systems that are available we manufacture and that other companies all full color systems.
All right, yeah, that's helpful, and yeah, having a kid at that school, I've seen that sign covered up, given the damage that it's received over and over again. So appreciate that insight as well. Councillor Moore.
Great, thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to move the recommendation that based on the January 25th, 2023 staff report, development variance permit number 2201-377 Lerwick Road, which is the Comox Valley Aquatic Center, council approve option 1 and direct staff to provide public notice to adjacent property owners and occupants and request feedback regarding development variance permit number 2201, and that council make a decision on development variance permit number 2201 at the February 8th, 2023 regular council meeting.
It's been moved and seconded. We have great discussion around it. Any further questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And we move on to 6.1.3, 278 Island Highway North, the Chrysler dealership. And again, we can probably pass this over to staff.
Ms. Goddard is going to introduce this as well.
All right, through mayor and council. In this case, fewer variances, although the situation is somewhat similar of replacing an existing sign. So this is the Dodge Chrysler Jeep Ram dealership on Island Highway North, the old Canadian Tire location. So they're proposing to replace an existing oversized freestanding sign with a new oversized monumental style freestanding sign. You can see on images 2 and 3 what the existing sign looks like and how the figure 3, the proposal is the proposed monument style. Monument style is a bylaw objective as opposed to the singular or even the dual posts. And staff do support these variances. A slight height and area increases than what bylaw permits, but not over. It's not an over increase from what you see today, because we assess it as being a net improvement to the overall sign situation there. The other thing is they also are adding quite a bit more landscape screening around this sign than the bylaw actually requires, so further net improvement. There is actually, I notice Ryan Matthews on the call who represents this file if you have any technical questions for the applicant.
Excellent. Thanks, Nancy. Appreciate that. And we do have a question from Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Overall, I don't see any concerns at all with the replacement other than I suppose it being sort of monument, which I guess means tombstone style. It's solid at its base, whereas the existing one is two narrow pillars. So this would reduce visibility to some degree. I just wanted to confirm that staff are satisfied that doesn't pose any, given the location of the sign, doesn't pose any additional safety hazards, just that slight diminishment of sight lines.
Yeah, through CAO to council, the city requires we have standards around intersection sight lines and where where structures cannot be or signs cannot be installed within, and this does not trigger the intersection sight lines. So it's outside of that particular view window.
Excellent. Any further questions or comments? Councillor Hillian.
Yeah, I'll move the recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, any opposed? That passes unanimously. Next, we have variance 2207. And again, we can turn it back over to staff. Mr. Garrett?
Yeah, thank you through the mayor.
Sorry, we're going faster now.
My apologies, my machine is frozen. So we'll turn it over into parcel tax review and sorry, 635, 649 5th Street. Ms. Goddard again is our introducer.
Yeah, hello again. So on this instance, two properties on 5th Street between Johnston and Harmston. There is a Johnston and Harmston. There is a two properties in which an existing home straddles right now, and so the owner would love to develop each one of those individual small properties with single residential buildings on there with an old orchard forming character. That is a requirement and is a condition of this drafted permit with the variances. They intend to move the existing large structure or larger home to another property in the regional district. And because the lots are so small, they're quite narrow, they would require variances to make functional homes there. And I believe they do have 4 bedrooms each, which is quite a nice housing stock to our to what the citizens of Courtenay need. So yeah, this is just a variances to basically for both of the properties to reduce the total side yard from 4.5 meters with a minimum setback of 1.5 on one side, to reduce it from that to a total of 1.93 meters with a minimum setback of 0.9 on any one side. It just gives them a little bit of flexibility to ultimately land those buildings, but the variances are structured to be similar on both properties.
All right, thanks very much. And we have Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Nancy. Just looking at the proposal, I think this is exactly the sort of thing we are wanting to see. This is taking a small house with what I'm guessing 1 or 2 bedrooms, which of course is going to be moved somewhere else, and adding 2 4-bedroom homes. And these are, of course, walking distance from schools, from grocery stores, from libraries. It's just an optimal location. And I'm also just really pleased to see that the previous public information meeting, there seemed to be universal approval in all of the comments and really genuinely glowing people saying it's just going to look better. They were absolutely in support. As I understand it, that was a public information meeting over a 3-meter total side yard. And now we're looking at a 1.9 meter. So I very much doubt that people's opinions are going to change greatly based upon a slightly narrower side yard. But I certainly support this going ahead to a further public information meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton and Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I certainly agree with Councillor Cole Hamilton's comments. I took part in a workshop over the noon hour today with building industry representatives and elected officials from across the island. And of course, one of the issues that was being discussed in relation to the housing challenges we face was the permitting process and the bureaucracy that it takes to get something built. So I'm just curious if staff could let us know how long this particular project has taken from the initial application to this stage tonight. It's obviously going to take a while for construction and all that sort of thing, but if there's anything that we can have shared with us around the processing time to this stage.
Yeah, through the CAO to Councillor Hillian. I'm just looking, the application came in on April 12th of 2022. That was a time of a lot of volume in our department and staff change. Yeah, we would certainly intend to have applications proceed quicker than that. I must always acknowledge though that in doing reviews and seeing, you know, where an application might need a little more information or a little more work, oftentimes the need for that information to do that more work can sit with the applicant. I don't know if in this instance, I don't know the particulars enough of the timeline, but timeline can be affected by a number of factors and parties.
Thanks very much, and I'll just congratulate the applicants and for their patience in working it through. And have we had the recommendation moved? I'll move the recommendation.
Excellent. Thank you for moving and seconding that. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. That gets us to financial services, parcel tax review panel.
I'll get it right this time, and yeah, Mr. Langemeyer is going to give a short overview.
Hello, nice to be here once again tonight. I am filling in for Renata, who is on a well-deserved vacation somewhere very sunny. So she does not get to talk about this. The Parcel Tax Roll Review Panel is an exciting annual meeting that must be held to allow people the opportunity to voice their disagreement with how the parcel tax has been applied to their property. This kind of takes the space with your property value taxes. You can go to BC assessment to make that argument that something isn't right. The city must hold a parcel tax roll review panel to do this. So what we do is we set a date when it's going to be held, which is going to be February 22nd at 3 p.m. With that information, we can send out notifications to all people with new parcel taxes. So that'll apply when you subdivide a property. It had one parcel tax, now it's chopped into, say, 3. New parcel tax being applied to it. We send a letter. Here's a parcel tax we've calculated for it. What happens then typically is if a person has an issue, they'll contact staff right away. We'll look at, like, was there a miscalculation in the amount of frontage being applied? You know, is this not a complete subdivision? Did something else happen? And every single response that I've seen in my career are always solved on a technicality. I haven't come across a time where somebody can't have their problem solved by fixing the error, where they have to proceed to the panel to say, I disagree with how parcel taxes are charged in the city of Courtenay. Here's my opportunity to, in writing, talk to the panel. So with that, we have found that Councillors Morin, McCollum, and Hillian are available that day, and they're invited to be present at 3 p.m. I've noticed past practice here was to cancel the meeting if we had no respondents. I'm taking a different approach, and I'd like to hold a meeting no matter what. We'll open the meeting, say nothing was received. We approve the parcel tax roll, close the meeting. Now we have something on record. So in 100 years from now, when we're looking at how we did parcel tax, it's there.
Excellent.
Yes.
I appreciate that. And I recall being in a meeting and sort of doing the 3. Does anybody have anything, even though there was no one there? But of course, now we can do it online, I suppose. Is it going to be interactive and live streamed as well? So anybody have any questions or comments? I think it's relatively straightforward. Thank you. Awesome. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes. I'm going to look to council. We still got about 8 or 9 more motions. I didn't know if we want to kind of do council reports and have a dinner break. But I think our council reports might be fairly quick. So yes, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just wondering if we can prioritize any items that we have people in the gallery waiting for who have already been waiting for a long time. I would hate to think that they would have to sit while we break for some nourishment.
Do you have suggestions on things that might need to be? I mean, do we poll people and say?
What are you here for? Participation bylaw.
And
We're here to do your
There's a motion that I propose.
okay. Yeah, we can do both of those. Councillor, sorry, I'm trying to click the button here. Councillor Moore, did you want to do yours?
Yeah, I will just bring it up.
Well, I believe Ellie said that.
Yeah, if it's unanimous, if no one has an objection, we can.
Oh, I thought that it was actually on the agenda.
It's on the agenda. We're talking about varying it. I thought Ellie said that.
Oh, to vary
if
the
there's
agenda,
nobody,
sorry.
if I say, does anybody have any complaints? And that, which is basically like taking a vote. I don't see anybody yelling and screaming. Councillor Moore, right back to you.
Great, thank you, Mayor. So I have a resolution bringing forward, which I did do late, and I appreciate having the latitude to bring it forward because it is an urgent situation. So the motion is, whereas Grace Mukazambo, a local resident who arrived in Canada 4 years ago from Zimbabwe, claiming refugee status, has been ordered to be deported. And whereas Grace fears for her well-being and that of her family and is awaiting a decision on her application for permanent residency. And whereas Grace has positively contributed to the Comox Valley, working in local organizations that support our most vulnerable citizens and that are experiencing staffing shortages, therefore be it resolved that Council immediately contact the Federal Minister of Immigration sorry, I will correct this, but I have an addition to put in, another minister to put in here. I'll just find that name. If I can. Also, Minister Medicino of the Canada Border Services Agency. So actually 2 ministers with an urgent request to recommend a stay of deportation for Grace Mukazambo. And I did send this information to Ms. Dallimore with that addition.
Okay.
And I just would like to speak to it if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I did prepare something and timed it, so I wouldn't take up tons of time here. So as per the resolution, Grace Mukazambo is a local resident who arrived in Canada 4 years ago as a refugee fleeing violence in Zimbabwe. So through a resident who alerted me to this situation, Grace did share with me sensitive information regarding her basis of claim. And it is disturbing to say the least. I'm not going to go into the detail of the sensitive information, but I will say that if she is returned to Zimbabwe, she certainly faces violence. She states that she fears death, rape, and torture. Grace has proven herself to be valuable to the Comox Valley, working 4 different jobs in the social services sector with our most vulnerable citizens. As we know, we have a workforce crisis across Canada that is felt here in the Comox Valley. As we face more and more challenges with social issues in our community, such as mental health, poverty, the toxic drug crisis, and homelessness, many newcomers like Grace are helping fill vital positions in the social services and health sectors. Although the federal government claims to be finding ways to streamline and expedite immigration processes to help undocumented people gain permanent residency status, it's not happening fast enough, especially for people like Grace. Although Grace has an application in for permanent residency, she has been notified that she is scheduled to be deported next week, and thus the urgency of this resolution. So this is an urgent situation with representatives in higher levels of government also providing advocacy. And I have had some advisement from some of those folks in terms of the process going forward if this resolution is passed. She certainly has other advocates trying to help in this situation. I recently read that federal judge Shirzad Ahmad has suggested that we owe a moral debt to immigrants who have been working on the front lines during COVID in this country. I'm asking for council to support this resolution to urge both ministers mentioned in the resolution to stay Grace's deportation and allow time for her permanent residency process to be completed. And the 4 jobs that she currently holds, one is as a team leader in a supportive housing program for people previously unhoused. One is staff at a shelter for victims of domestic violence and their children. One is a relief worker in a program that supports people trying to overcome their addictions. And the 4th is relief worker in a program that houses youth with disabilities. And I had just a coincidental encounter with one of her employers who said to me that it's not an overstatement to say that if they lose Grace as an employee, they may actually have to shut down the program that she works in because we are in such dire situation with staffing in both social services and the health sector here locally. So this is an issue that has obviously major ramifications for Grace herself, but also does have an impact on our community. And I think that this resolution would send a message that first of all, Grace is needed in our community, and also that the initiatives that the federal government is saying that they're wanting to move forward really need to move at a much faster pace, because we need newcomers in this community and across Canada to fill these workplace vacancies. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Morin and Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to speak in 100% support of Councillor Morin and just thank her, because I'm knowing that it was only on Monday afternoon that when meeting with our MP, the idea to try and contact the minister at this point arose, and in this very short period of time, you put together an excellent motion and supporting material. Anyway, just support 100% and just hope whoever represents her at the hearing does as good a job as Councillor Morin. Thanks.
Great words, Councillor Cole Hamilton and Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to Councillor Morin for bringing this forward and for all the advocates in the community. I just wanted to add, there is a GoFundMe campaign to support the legal fees attached to this process for Grace. If you just Googled her name and GoFundMe, you'll be able to find it. It's at $42.59 of a $9,000 goal as of right now. I did want to just add, as someone who works in this health and social services sector and is, working really close with a lot of our nonprofits in the community. This is one of those examples of a national policy and commitment to supporting a health human resource gap that we have and are going to have for the foreseeable future, where the policy at the national level is not being felt here locally. And I appreciate Councillor Morin doing some background around the specific impacts that this might have on one of our nonprofits. And I don't think it could be an understatement around what that impact could be on multiple workplaces, on families, on children and youth in our community if one of those services were to close its doors, whether it be permanently or temporarily. So I just wanted to speak again in favor of this, and thank you for bringing it forward.
Thanks very much for those comments, Councillor Morin.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to mention that I have been in touch with MP Gord John's office, and I do have the particulars for moving forward if this resolution passes. They're extremely supportive over there. They're going to help me fast track things and provide some support for that. I also wanted to note that Grace does in fact have a work permit. Everything she's done has been according to the regulations. So she's been fulfilling her responsibilities. We don't know why this is happening other than maybe a backlog and the information not catching up to the folks that need it. And there's also two different departments, two different ministries involved here, but we're hoping that this advocacy will maybe provide the information that's needed to keep Grace here. Thank you.
Thanks again, Councillor Morin, and thanks for all the comments. As was alluded to, thanks to our MP Gord Johns, who provided some guidance as well. And with that, all those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thanks again for that. That was item 8.2. You had a comment from the gallery?
I just want to say that I've been in contact with right now. She's an advocate right now. She's doing recording tomorrow and she said.
Okay, well, we'll try to get that letter in our hands as quick as possible. Thanks. Appreciate the update. I believe the other one was item 10.1.2, the Parkland disposition. You were waiting for that one. Again, is anybody opposed to us sparing to that item? Seeing none, I'll pass it over to staff.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Again, Ms. Gothard is here to provide an overview. This is a very long-standing file. The public hearing was a good time ago. We've been working diligently to try and push this through. The requirement in terms of parkland exchange or disposition was identified in the first and second reading report at the time, but it has taken an extremely long time to get through this, and it is an example of a file that was impacted by our circumstances in the department, and I appreciate Councillor Hillian asking for a little bit of feedback on that, and we are definitely doing our best to move that through. So Nancy, if you had just a brief overview, I know it's been a long evening for you.
All right, through the CIO to Mayor and Council. So an overview on the alternative approval process recommendation as the process to dispose of a small piece of land, parkland, in support of a rezoning subdivision. So this slide here is just showing some context. The little yellow star on the left shows in relation to the city in the south Courtney part along our border. You can see in orange there, and then on the right is the property in question that is subject to the rezoning. Next slide, please. This is right next to the Ridge development and Buckstone, also known as the and I'll also mention that that's Millard Creek that's flowing through there that you saw with the blue line. This is a close-up of the proposed subdivision that would have been presented for the first and second reading and at the public hearing. And in it, you can see that there are a total of 12 lots that ultimately would be created. The zone is the comprehensive development 21 zone. It is the zone that a lot of the neighboring Ridge also has. It permits single residential dwellings and suites. Those are permitted as of right. And then on larger of the lots, duplexes and carriage homes are permitted. So that would be that those uses would transfer over into this area as well. And it is a bare land strata proposal as well. So the road servicing into the development would be private, along with those other utilities in there. So what you can see here with the blue and the red and the green line work there is the blue is showing that from Harbor View Boulevard, which exists today, that has all those lots along them, many of them subdivided, The proposal is to use one of those fee simple lots and that be for Estrada Road. And then in order though to get all the way to the actual property in question, a small piece of public park would have to be disposed. A linear park would have to be pierced in order for the road to actually cross through. And part of the negotiation was to make sure that public access to the linear park would be maintained. And so you can see in green there that there is a 4.5 meter width that would include a sidewalk that would be public land that would connect to the linear park, should the linear park ever be developed as a trail. It is not currently developed as a trail. Next slide, please. This one shows a little more detail of some of that park, those park features. And you can see that the intention of actually designing the private road with little bulb outs and a crossing one day would be to facilitate very clearly that there's you know public that could be walking through here. Yes. And then in terms of some of the other kind of details and features of this actual development, because I do appreciate it has been a long time since the proposal, the rezoning itself has been presented to council. We do see that there are some parkland dedications that are proposed. They are shown in green and within the blue dotted line. So there's green color above the blue dotted line, but that is existing park. So within the dashed, I should say dash line, the linear dash line, there's some park that would be dedicated as a matter of a policy, environmentally sensitive areas. It's a policy to have them dedicated. And then there's some additional land outside of the environmentally sensitive areas that goes above and beyond those setback standards on a creek. And that is being proposed there as well behind lots 10 and 11. Just checking the numbers on the balance of the parkland requirement. It looks like it might be just a little bit shy. And if that is the case, then where in instances where it's a little bit shy of parkland dedication, then a cash in lieu for any outstanding percentage of land for park is an option available to the city. And then in terms of the amenities, there is cash that has into the Parks, Recreation, Culture, and Seniors Amenity Reserve Fund, and then also into the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund on a per lot basis. That has been negotiated. That would form part of the ultimate zoning. And then also on another amenity is, I didn't mention this, but from Fraser Road, today there is a private driveway. You can see it in faint line there that goes to the existing house shown at the bottom of the slide. And there is a culvert there, and in general, it's environmental practice to have few crossings on a creek wherever possible, wherever they are needed to make them into a bridge. Those are the more environmentally friendly options. In this instance, the negotiation is actually to have the culvert ultimately to have it removed, because the access would no longer be required to those existing homes there, and that is seen as a net benefit too for the creek, along with the restoration that would happen around that creek culvert removal. And just a comment that there are no major frontage improvements required, as this is mostly a built up subdivision and they have very minimal frontage. Next slide, please. And then just some highlights on the process, how we've gotten to where we are today. The first and second reading of this bylaw of CD 21 occurred on September 8th, 2020. So I forgot to put that date in there, but that is the first and second reading. Then the public hearing was held on December 14th, 2020. And the third reading of the bylaw occurred on January 11th, 2021. So I'm all talking about the zoning bylaw in this instance. And then even Ministry of Transportation signed off on the bylaw in later, it was around that time of the early 2021. And so that is required because they own, or it's within their jurisdiction, the Fraser Road right there. Then there were some delays, as city manager referred to, the appraisal process itself, a process to get it appraised. So some time for that study, then some key staffing changes in key departments. And then also the decision to wait until after the November 22 election, just to make sure that people were clear what they'd be voting on in this instance, or not voting, but signing on to the electoral form in relation to a general election. And then in terms of the next steps, before you is a decision on whether to proceed with the parkland disposition bylaw. And if so, and rather I should say that you'll notice that the report recommends two options. So there is the alternative approval process, and pursuant to the community charter, that is approval of the electors is obtained under such a process if by the deadline for receiving electoral responses, the number of responses received is less than 10% of the eligible electors in the city of Courtenay. So 10% of 22,656 is 2,266 electors. So should more than 10% of eligible electors oppose the proposed disposition, council would not be able to proceed with considering the parkland disposition bylaw. And it would definitely have implications on the zoning bylaw as well, because the whole development's been designed to have access through that park. Now, the alternative to this process is the assent vote, which is a more similar process to holding a general election, in which 50%, to holding a general election, and then on top of which, in this case, 50% plus one of the votes must be in favor in order to proceed. It's a much more expensive and complex process, and is not recommended for this instance. Now, just a few concluding remarks. Staff do recognize that disposing of parkland is a very significant decision. Staff, however, support this disposition and use of the AAP process because the proposed benefits outweigh the drawbacks in our view. The area of land is small relative to the larger linear park, and pedestrian access will be maintained. In exchange, pedestrian access will be established between Harborview Boulevard and the linear park, the little green strip I showed before. A larger area of the Millard Creek riparian area will be protected, and a culvert and driveway will be removed. And now, if council chooses not to consider disposing of the parkland, and the applicant would need to modify their proposal to establish their access from Fraser Road. And so obviously that would have big implications for the environment and the overall layout, and definitely would affect timeline and delays of the rezoning. Now, should council immediately proceed with the alternative approval process, neighbors will be made aware of the proposed rezoning and future proposed subdivision, and may choose to give council their opinions regarding the rezoning application, as well as the parkland disposition, which is the matter at hand. So staff note that according to legislation, council is unable to receive new information on the topic of a public hearing after the public hearing has concluded. So in order to ensure the public is aware of this procedural requirement, staff will ensure that the notices are clear that the information to be received by the public shall only be in relation to the parkland disposition bylaw and not the rezoning itself. So we are aware that there could be a need for some clarification for people. So that concludes my notes, and happy to take questions.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And we have one from Councillor McCall.
I actually don't have a question. That was a great report. I had a couple listed and you covered it all. So thank you, Nancy. I was just going to move the recommendation if that's all right.
Absolutely. Been seconded by Councillor Moore.
Just going to read it, but I prefer to not. So that's great.
All right. That being said, Councillor Jolliker.
Yeah, and I also had all my questions answered and previously from staff, so appreciation of the very detailed report and the work done to date. The only question that wasn't answered was right at the end of your presentation, Nancy, was predictively, I think that I appreciate that you have spent some time thinking about how residents in the neighborhood may or may not have some comments on the zoning that has now reached has passed third reading. It's probably not for planning staff, but from a procedural perspective, what would be our mechanism to revisit, is there a mechanism to revisit that at the time, or is it just when it comes for final adoption for us to be able to, if by chance there is a large proportion of the neighbors who do have new feedback that hasn't been received prior, that is provided to us, maybe just some clarification from staff. I know that it will be communicated that we can't receive any. So any thoughts on that?
Through the mayor to Councillor Jolicoeur, ultimately council would then not proceed with adoption of the bylaw. The applicant would be made aware and they could choose to reinitiate the process, can send it back to public hearing. The applicant would need to amend their items, but ultimately the proposal in front of you is what you'd be voting on. And unless the applicant wanted to change that, that would be the matter in front of you. I mean, ultimately, we've been through this process and respect the ability for people to provide some feedback. This, as outlined in the attached first and second reading report, which was the subject of the public hearing, this has all been made clear previous. So the public would be aware of this. It may be new people have moved in the period of time. I'm chuckling awkwardly because it has been a very long time. So I believe that's the process. And now we'll cross the bridge literally when it comes to that, following the closure of the AP process, and we can deliberate at that point if that's okay with council.
Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. And my last question, given that there wasn't necessarily a ton of information in the report, I do note that in the zoning process that Millard Creek, the Millard Creek folks were consulted, and I'm wondering if staff can provide if there was any feedback pertaining to that original driveway that's there and the removal of the little bridge that they have, and or any comments on the Parkland acquisition process.
Through the CAO to council, I'm just trying to bring up that document as we speak. And oh, interesting. Okay, the one I brought up says the land trust has no further comments at this time. I must I know they did provide some comments though, because I saw it on the subdivision application already. I think I need a moment maybe to provide more technical info in a follow-up, if that's all right.
Yeah, I think that's fine. And it probably sometime in the near future, we're going to be taking a break as well. And I'm not sure if that information is critical for the vote, but just would be good to know. Councillor Jolicoeur.
Just would be given the context of the sensitivity and the thought that's gone into what would happen if this is approved. It'd be nice to have that on record for those who may be watching now or at a later date that have concerns around the existing property and specifically Millard Creek. So, but yes, Mayor, for me, it would not make a difference, but I think it would be nice to have.
Okay, appreciate that. And I've got a question that actually I had this morning, and I was going to talk to staff about it later on, but it was brought up earlier tonight or on this that's kind of not really critical to this, but the idea that these properties could have secondary suites or carriage houses. And something that I was asked today was whether or not a carriage house would negate the ability to also have a secondary suite. If that makes sense. So you could have your main residence, secondary suite, and a carriage house. Mr. Garvey.
I can answer that. No, that would be 3 units on
the
properties.
Okay.
If I may, we council received as maybe as Nancy's looking. I see her busy looking on the screen. That's weird about video calls. You know, we need to be hopeful that there are opportunities to provide those additional units in those developments. And I was a representative here. Unfortunately, in response to some potential concerns on another rezoning in the Copperfield area, the developer chose to actually remove some of those aspects that were the affordable components of that, which are secondary suites. So we really want to make sure that it's clear to the development community that opportunity is there, and it's in the community's interest to have secondary suites. You know, it's sometimes in different neighborhoods. These are challenges, particularly primarily single residential neighborhoods, but overall in the adjacent area, there's a whole mix of uses. So we're really hopeful that that goes forward. And provides opportunities and a mix of people that are in those areas, which is entirely consistent with the four core cardinal points of our official community plan. So maybe I think they go like this when you're on the radio for Ms. Goddard, if she does have some information from what Millard Piercy Stewards provided into the file.
Yeah, through the CAO to council, as I'm navigating the rezoning, I'm just finding there isn't the content from the Millard Piercy in there, but it is in the subdivision application that's already been made. There is quite a few comments, and referral comments can form part of public record. So I'm just thinking that, you know, we were going to let people know that there is the development tracker. It has information that people can look at and follow to see how we've gotten to where we are with the rezoning, and so the referral could be there. I do see there are, you know, questions around setbacks, very common, you know, wish for, you know, people representing environmental values. They ask about the 30 meters. There is a 30 meter setback in this instance. So that is the city of Courtenay's highest standard. There's a lot of technical questions here about the drainage and the stormwater and the infiltration and how it interfaces with the development and the stream. And those are technical matters that have to adhere to our subdivision servicing bylaw. So as I'm reading them, I can't quite answer the answers or see the answers myself. And they talk about, you know, site rehabilitation being very important for any of that, you know, culvert work needing to happen. Yes, absolutely. That'd be a condition of environmental development permit. And then they do reference an interest in the tree retention as much as possible. This property actually had a tree cutting permit issued in 2018, and they met their tree density target at that time. And so now, you know, we're at the next stage where if they want to do any more removal, they have to adhere to the bylaw. We do expect mature trees to have to come out. However, there's strong replacement requirements in the tree bylaw. And I will point out it's not really an amenity, it's more a requirement, but at the southern extent of the property, there's a 15 meter agricultural land reserve buffer that will be covenanted on those properties and have vegetation both retained and planted on them. So there will definitely be a tree presence on there. So I think that kind of summarizes like the major comments of the Millard Piercy Stewards, but we're happy to.
Okay, I think at that, the nods I'm getting from staff are we should probably just call the vote at this point. So moved and seconded already. So, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And it's pretty much 7 o'clock. So maybe let's plan to be back at about 20 after 7.
We are unmuted and we have started the video and we're sharing.
Fantastic. Welcome back, everybody. And we're just going to continue on with our agenda. We're on item number 7, council reports, and we'll start with Councillor Cole Hamilton. That's a pass. Councillor Frisch is a pass. Councillor Hillian, pass. Councillor Jolicoeur. Hang on one second.
Yeah, so just wanted to speak about beyond the ongoing work with the substance use strategy and the coalition to end homelessness. I wanted to speak to two events. One with today, and Councillor Morin was there as well. The Collaboratory, which is an initiative of the Welcome Communities Coalition, which is a coalition that is coordinated through the Immigration Welcome Center for North Vancouver Island. It was a really beautiful presentation that focused on building empathy through learning about immigrant experiences and newcomers' experiences in our communities. And some of the themes that was really helpful in this, and the reason I'm mentioning is because the Collaboratory is an ongoing initiative of the Welcome Communities Coalition, so they will have more to come. Themes today were about social isolation, barriers to employment, meeting basic needs, and ways for us as a community to support newcomers in the spaces that we share. So whether it be social spaces or workplaces, and so I just want to put my shout out to the Welcome Communities Coalition for really taking a strong stance in supporting our community members, organizations in doing better around how we support newcomers to our community. The second piece, February 23rd, is the yearly Coolest Night of the Year. Again, it's supporting 2 local nonprofits who work in housing and social services, Dawn to Dawn, who came and presented to us this evening, and the Comox Valley Transition Society. They are, of course, still accepting people to sign up as individual walkers and joining an existing team. You can find information at www.cnoy.org/location/Comox Valley. I'm sure you can Google it as well. And that the team is also looking for volunteers for the day of. There'll be soup available for those finishing the walk and wanting to warm up, and we'll be at the Native Sons Hall. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Councillor Jolicoeur. Councillor McCollum. Councillor Morin. And I just got a few things. I had an interesting interview with SFU doing a report on social media and elections, which was somewhat timely. Got to give some feedback on some of the things that happened here. Also took out the winners of the Child Development telethon Mayor's Lunch winners, which was great. We talked lots about politics and policies around various things. And then this morning, actually, we had the Comox Valley Chamber Economic Outlook. And not unlike things that we've seen over the past few years where economic development is intertwined with housing and childcare. Those were the themes that were really passed along today. So with that, we'll move right along to council resolutions, and we have Councillor Cole Hamilton. Sure. Who's like, Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, thank you. So the motion is whereas the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM, represents the interests of member municipalities on policy program matters that fall within the federal jurisdiction. And whereas FCM's board of directors is comprised of elected municipal officials from all regions and sizes of communities to form a broad base of support and provide FCM with the united voice required to carry the municipal message to the federal government. Therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the City of Courtenay endorse Councillor Will Cole Hamilton to stand for election on FCM's Board of Directors for the period starting January 2023 and ending May 31st, 2023. And be it further resolved that the Council assume all costs associated with Councillor Will Cole Hamilton's attending of FCM's Board of Director meetings.
Great, it's been moved and seconded. Councillor Cole Hamilton, would you like to speak to the motion?
I would. Thank you, Mayor. As all of you around this table know, that I became a committee member of FCM back in September, and a motion identical to this was unanimously passed. And this motion is not allocating any additional funds. It just means if I were to be selected as a director, it would fall into that category. So it's the same fund, but would just be allocated to a different position at FCM. And just on that note, I was fortunate enough to be appointed to the board of UBCM last week, and happily discovered that UBCM actually pays all of the costs of attendance and travel for folks who serve on that board. So I'll be able to represent the city at no additional cost. Thanks.
Fantastic. Appreciate that. And Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to clarify, this is only until the end of May this year. And then presumably you could run for re-election. Do you know how many meetings happen within that time frame?
You want to?
Currently. Thanks, and thanks for stepping forward.
Great comment, Councillor Hillian. Really appreciate this, having our voice at the table at the federal level. Absolutely critical. So really appreciate Councillor Cole-Hamilton for stepping up. That being said, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. We already did 8.2, so we have notice of motion from Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So I just want to give notice of the following motion coming up at the next meeting. And the motion being regarding outdoor court usage. And whereas the City of Courtenay provides outdoor courts for use by tennis and pickleball players, and whereas the city wishes to ensure that these courts are allocated to ensure the maximum benefit to residents, therefore be it resolved, the council directs staff to prepare a report assessing current usage and outlining options that would make optimal use of our outdoor courts. And then we will have a full discussion of this and vote at the next upcoming meeting.
At an upcoming meeting or the next upcoming meeting? Sorry, just the way that sounded. It's coming forward at some point, or it's not time limited.
No, I just assumed we do it. Notice we do it next meeting.
Oh, right. Notice the motion. So we don't need seconders or anything. Oh, wow. All right. That being said, we have another notice of motion for living wage. Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
You're ready for it. Okay, so this motion regarding the living wage. And so whereas the City of Courtenay, in recognition of high cost of living and the need for employees to earn a sufficient wage, is considering a purchasing authority bylaw that, among other factors, favors businesses that pay their employees a living wage for the Comox Valley as identified by www.livingwageforfamilies.ca website. And whereas the city employs seasonal staff and retains contract personnel at an hourly wage which is lower than the living wage, which is currently in 2022 was $20.26 an hour in the Comox Valley. Therefore, be it resolved, the council directs staff to prepare a report outlining the steps required and costs involved in becoming a living wage employer.
All right. Thanks for those notice of motions, and we'll move right into bylaws. Thanks for bringing those forward to Councillor Cole-Hamilton. And for first, second, and third reading, we have bylaw 3093 and Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move that council give first, second, and third reading to sewer infrastructure projects 2023 loan authorization bylaw number 3093, 2023. That council directs staff to proceed with the alternative approval process, AAP, to gain electorate approval for sewer infrastructure projects 2023 loan authorization bylaw number 3093, 2023.
That's been moved in second. Any questions or comments regarding this? Seeing, Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick one. We're still waiting to hear back on our grant application, and I'm just wondering how that would impact the borrowing if we can basically change it up until the project gets started, or how that works. Is it a ceiling or? Sorry.
Wonderful, good question. I anticipated that. So by passing this loan authorization bylaw and starting the process does not mean we must borrow $2.5 million. It says we can borrow up to. 2.5. So once construction comes along, maybe we're successful with the grant, and we finish a project off, that's when I transfer and make the recommendation to determine, how much do we want to take from reserves? How much do we get from the grant? How much do we actually need to take the long-term debt? If we can get that below the maximum, that's perfect. Anytime we can reduce the amount of debt we take on, less interest we pay.
Great, thanks for that answer.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm not sure, like even in the wording on the recommendation, those dollar amounts and like the up to, that could provide maybe clarity in the future when if we have more AAPs and things coming forward to us, just so it's right there. Yeah, but other than that, great answer. I don't see any further questions or comments. Oh, I do now. Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question for staff again. What's the length of time that's being prescribed here in the recommendation? And can you speak to whether or not there's been examples in the past where we've done something similar?
Mr. Garvey?
In terms of process.
Yes, thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Jolicoeur. This is our process when we do loan authorizations. But with respect to your question on the timeline for response, I'll maybe refer to Mr. Langemar.
Can you be more clear on the timeline for response?
Is there an actual specific amount of time it has to be done within kind of thing, or? Oh, and we'll pass it over to Madam Clerk here.
I can speak a little bit as to the process since Legislative Services usually runs the AAPs. I believe we're required to have them open for 30 days, but typically we would have them open for longer than that. Number one, so that we don't run into an issue where they say, oh, you did your AAP wrong. And number two, because we like to give the public a little bit longer often to give their comments. So for example, the timeline with the AAP that we discussed earlier tonight, we're allowing an extra week. And the reason we chose that deadline too is that there's a recommendation that we not run AAPs over holidays. So that one ends right before spring break. So we are required to send the bylaw to the Inspector of Municipalities in this case. And the timeline is typically 2 to 10 weeks when we get that back. So we will be coming back to council with a report similar to the other one that establishes the number of electors, all of that, all of those details, the form for it. And that report will also say what the timeline is. So it's hard to speculate exactly what it will be, but we'll look at holidays and we'll probably allocate at least an extra week for people to give their feedback.
Excellent answer from everyone. Thank you. That being said, I don't see any further questions or comments. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. We already did 10.1.2, so we'll go to adoption, and we have bylaw 2023 and Councillor Morin.
I'll move that council adopt City of Courtenay Delegation of Purchasing Authority bylaw number 3082, 2023.
Excellent. It's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments regarding that? Seeing none. Oh, Mr. Garvey.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I didn't want to preempt any from council. Just wanted to say, basically we had some deliberation around the table. We've reached out to Comox First Nation already to talk about setting up a conversation about how this policy is going to work, how we can work together, as well as just get some feedback. Council had discussed having a public release of information celebrating this wonderful policy change, and we wouldn't be doing that until we've had a chance to consult with Comox, just for council's reference.
Thanks for that clarification. Seeing no further questions or comments, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously, and we have our in-camera resolution. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes, and we are in camera.